Running his palm over his clean-shaven head, he glanced at the clock, 2:47 p.m. on a Wednesday that felt like any other, until the phone rang. "Ellison Electric," he answered, his deep voice carrying the practiced tone of someone who'd said those words thousands of times before. The response on the other end made his knees buckle. "Mr. Ellison, this is Mercy General Hospital. Your son was born an hour ago." The fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too bright, the familiar sense of his workshop too sharp. Mike's free hand found the edge of his workbench, gripping it until his knuckles turned white. Son. The word echoed in his mind like a bell struck in an empty church. There must be some mistake, he managed, but even as the words left his mouth, his mind flickered back to that night 8 months ago. Beatrice Monroe. The memory hit him like a physical force. Her magnetic presence, those knowing eyes, the way her curls caught the light at the local diner where they'd first locked eyes. One night of connection that had felt like so much more until morning came and reality set in. The nurse's voice continued, professional and steady. "Ms. Monroe has listed you as the father. She's given permission for us to contact you." A pause. "Would you like to come to the hospital?" Mike's throat felt dry as sandpaper. He looked around his shop, at the half-finished projects, the familiar tools, the predictable routine he'd built for himself. Everything in its place, everything under control. But now, "I'll be there," he heard himself say. The drive to Mercy General was a blur. His work boots felt heavy as he walked through the automatic doors, past mothers with balloons, and fathers pacing nervous circles in the waiting room. The elevator ride to the maternity ward seemed to take hours, though his watch told him it was only seconds. Room 412. Mike stood outside, his reflection ghostly in the polished floor. Through the partially open door he could hear soft murmuring, the gentle beep of monitors, and then a sound that made his heart stutter, the quiet coos of a baby. When he finally found the courage to step inside, the world seemed to narrow to a single point of focus. There was Beatrice, looking exhausted but somehow more beautiful than he remembered, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in hospital-issue blankets. Her long cacheados framed her face like a crown, and despite the fatigue in her eyes, there was a fierce pride in the way she held herself. Their eyes met, and 8 months of unspoken words hung in the air between them. But before either could speak, the bundle in her arms squirmed, and a tiny hand reached up, grasping at nothing. "Would you like to meet your son?" Beatrice asked, her voice carrying a complex mixture of emotions, wariness, dignity, and something else he couldn't quite name. Mike stepped closer, his heart thundering in his chest. The baby, his son, had skin a few shades lighter than Beatrice's, with wisps of curly hair and eyes that, when they briefly opened, showed hints of warm brown. He was perfect. "His name is Noah," Beatrice said softly, watching Mike's face. With careful attention, Mike nodded, unable to form words. He'd spent years building walls around himself, creating a life of solitude that felt safe, if empty. But now, looking at this tiny person who carried his blood, those walls were crumbling. "I know this isn't," Beatrice began, then paused, choosing her words carefully. "I'm not expecting anything from you. I just thought he deserves to know where he comes from." The unspoken question hung between them. "What are you going to do?" Mike looked at his son again, then at Beatrice. He thought about his own father, who'd walked away when things got tough, about the promise he'd made to himself years ago to be different, better, about the loneliness of his everyday life and how empty it suddenly seemed. "I want to be here," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. I don't know what this looks like, but I want to be here, for him, for—" He met Beatrice's eyes. "For whatever this is." Beatrice's expression remained carefully neutral, but something in her shoulders relaxed slightly. "One day at a time," she said, adjusting Noah in her arms. "That's all any of us can do." As if in agreement, Noah made a small sound, his tiny fingers flexing in the air. Without thinking, Mike reached out, and those impossibly small fingers wrapped around his calloused index finger. The grip was surprisingly strong, as if saying, "I'm here, I'm real, and everything is different now." Through the window, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hospital room floor. Outside, the world continued its normal rhythm, cars honking, people rushing, life moving forward. But in room 412, time seemed to stand still as three people, two strangers connected by one precious life, began the complicated process of becoming something more than what they were before. Mike looked down at his son's tiny hand, still gripping his finger, and knew with absolute certainty that his life would never be the same. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. The quiet beeping of hospital monitors marked the seconds as they passed, each one carrying them further into this new, uncharted territory. None of them knew what tomorrow would bring, but for now, in this moment, they were exactly where life had meant them to be. The first week after Noah's birth passed in a blur of sleepless nights and uncertain days. Beatrice's small apartment in suburban Ohio had become a fortress of baby supplies, with diapers stacked in corners and bottles lined up on kitchen counters like tiny soldiers. The space that had once felt like enough for one now seemed to shrink with each passing day. Standing by the window at 3 a.m., Beatrice gently swayed with Noah against her chest, humming softly. The streetlights cast an amber glow through her curtains, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed through the night. Her body ached with exhaustion, but her mind refused to quiet. "Just you and me, little man," she whispered, pressing her lips to Noah's forehead. His warm weight against her chest was becoming familiar, like a piece of her heart living outside her body. But in moments like these, when the night stretched endlessly before her, she couldn't help but wonder if she was enough. A soft knock at her door startled her. Through the peephole, she saw Mike standing there, holding what looked like grocery bags. She hesitated for a moment, then opened the door. "I couldn't sleep," he said simply, his blue-gray eyes taking in her tired face. "Thought you might need supplies." He lifted the bags slightly. "Formula, diapers, some of those sandwich things you mentioned liking from the deli down the street." Beatrice felt something in her chest tighten. She hadn't expected this quiet thoughtfulness from a man who'd been a stranger just days ago. "You didn't have to," she started, but he shook his head. "I want to," Mike said, setting the bags on her small kitchen counter. He moved with careful precision in her space, like a man aware of his size in a china shop. "I know it's late, but I figured—" He gestured vaguely at Noah. "Babies don't exactly keep office hours." A small smile tugged at Beatrice's lips despite her exhaustion. "No, they certainly don't." She adjusted Noah in her arms, noting how his eyes had finally drifted closed. "He just fell asleep." Mike nodded, his eyes fixed on his son's peaceful face. "He has your nose," he observed softly. "But your chin," Beatrice replied without thinking. Their eyes met for a moment, and something unspoken passed between them. The strange intimacy of seeing their features merged in this tiny person they'd created. "How's the shop?" Beatrice asked, changing the subject as she carefully lowered Noah into his bassinet. She needed normalcy, needed to remember that they were just two adults trying to navigate an unexpected situation. Mike leaned against the counter, his work boots scuffing slightly on her linoleum floor. "Busy. Took on a big contract with the new development on Madison Street." He paused, fiddling with the edge of his jacket. "I've been thinking about hiring help. Maybe make my schedule more flexible." The implication hung in the air. For Noah. For this. Beatrice busied herself with organizing the supplies he'd brought, needing something to do with her hands. "I go back to work in 5 weeks," she said, her voice carefully neutral, "at the diner and the bookstore." She didn't mention the way her stomach clenched at the thought of leaving Noah with strangers, or how the cost of daycare kept her awake at night. Mike was quiet for a moment, then, "I could help. With Noah, I mean. When you're working." He said it casually, but Beatrice could hear the uncertainty beneath his words. She turned to face him, really looking at him for the first time that night. He'd clearly come straight from the shop. There was still a smudge of grease on his forearm, and his jeans bore the worn marks of honest work. But there was something else, too, a determination in his stance that hadn't been there in the hospital. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Mike's fingers went to the back of his neck, a gesture she was beginning to recognize, as his tell when he was processing emotions. "Because he's my son," he said finally. "Because you're doing this alone and you shouldn't have to. Because—" he took a deep breath. "Because every time I try to go back to my life before, it feels wrong now." Beatrice felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them away furiously. Damn hormones. "This isn't a fairy tale, Mike. We're not going to suddenly become some perfect family just because we share a child." "I know that," he said quietly. "I'm not asking for that. I'm just asking for a chance to be his father, to help you if you'll let me." From the bassinet, Noah made a small sound in his sleep, and both parents instinctively turned toward him. In that moment, Beatrice felt the weight of every decision pressing down on her shoulders. She thought about her mother's words from years ago. "Baby girl, life rarely gives you what you expect, but sometimes it gives you what you need." "We need rules," she said finally, turning back to Mike. "Boundaries, clear expectations." He nodded, relief visible in the slight relaxation of his shoulders. "Whatever you need." "I mean it," Beatrice continued, her voice stronger now. "This isn't just about diapers and formula runs at 3 a.m. This is about consistency, about showing up even when it's hard, about respecting each other's space and decisions." "I understand," Mike said, and something in his tone made her believe him. "I've been thinking about what my father didn't do, what I want to do differently." Beatrice moved to the kitchen table, gesturing for him to join her. As they sat down, the distance between them seemed both vast and insignificant. They were strangers connected by the most profound bond possible, trying to build something neither of them had planned for. "Tell me about your father," she said softly, recognizing the shadow that crossed his face at the mention. Mike's hands, clasped together on the table, his knuckles whitening slightly. "He left when I was 12. No goodbye, no explanation. Just gone." He swallowed hard. "My mom worked herself to death trying to keep us afloat. I swore I'd never be him." Beatrice finished gently. Mike nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "I've spent my whole life trying not to be him. Maybe that's why I never—" he gestured vaguely. "Never let anyone get close enough to matter." Beatrice understood then, with sudden clarity, why he'd disappeared. After their night together. Why he'd built walls so high around himself, and why perhaps he was here now trying to tear those same walls down. "My shift at the diner ends at midnight tomorrow," she said after a long moment. "If you want to come by, I could show you Noah's bedtime routine." The smile that crossed Mike's face was small but genuine. "I'd like that." As if on cue, Noah began to stir, his little face scrunching up in preparation for a cry. Beatrice started to rise, but Mike was already moving. "May I?" he asked, hovering near the bassinet. Beatrice nodded, watching as he carefully lifted Noah, his large hands surprisingly gentle. The baby settled against his chest, and Mike's expression softened in a way that made Beatrice's heart skip a beat. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. And in that moment Beatrice saw what could be, not a fairy tale, but something real. Something worth trying for. The night stretched on, and together they began the delicate dance of co-parenting, of learning each other's rhythms and boundaries, of building something neither of them had expected, but both were beginning to want. Outside, the Ohio night continued its quiet symphony of cricket songs and distant trains, while inside, 3 people began the careful work of becoming a family, one small step at a time. 2 weeks had passed since that late-night conversation, and Beatrice's apartment was beginning to show signs of a subtle transformation. A sturdy toolbox sat in the corner next to a newly installed baby swing. The rickety ceiling fan had stopped making that worrying click, and the kitchen sink's persistent drip had finally been silenced, small changes that spoke volumes about Mike's growing presence in their lives. "You don't have to fix everything, you know," Beatrice said one evening, watching as Mike installed cabinet locks with methodical precision. She'd just finished her shift at the bookstore, her feet aching from hours of standing, but there was something comforting about coming home to movement instead of silence. "Force of habit," Mike replied, testing the lock with a gentle tug. "Besides, these things matter now." He glanced meaningfully at Noah, who was contentedly exploring his own toes in the baby swing. Beatrice understood what he meant. Every loose, screw-and-sharp corner had taken on new significance since Noah's arrival. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that each improvement added another brick to a foundation she wasn't sure she was ready to build. "I made too much dinner," Mike said, changing the subject as he packed up his tools. "Chicken stew, my grandmother's recipe." Beatrice raised an eyebrow. "You cook?" "Don't sound so surprised," he chuckled, the sound still rare enough to catch her attention. "Can't survive on takeout forever." "Well, you can, but—" he gestured to his broad frame. "Gets expensive when you eat like I do." The domesticity of the moment struck Beatrice suddenly. Mike in her kitchen, Noah cooing nearby, the smell of home-cooked food in the air. It was everything she'd secretly wanted, and everything that terrified her. "I should get ready for my diner shift," she said, retreating to safer ground, but Mike's voice stopped her. "About that," he said, his tone careful. "I've been thinking. What if you didn't have to work 2 jobs? Beatrice felt her defenses rise. "I can take care of us." "I know you can," Mike said quickly. "That's not what I meant, He ran a hand over his head, a gesture she'd come to recognize as his way of gathering thoughts. "The shop's doing well, really well, and I've been putting money aside. For Noah, He met her eyes. "For whatever he needs, whatever you both need." Beatrice's chest tightened. "Mike, just hear me out," he continued. "You're killing yourself working these hours. Noah needs you. And yes, he needs the money too, but he's my son. Let me help. Really help." The pride that had sustained Beatrice through years of independence warred with the exhaustion bone deep in her body. "I can't just take your money." "It's not charity," Mike said firmly. "It's my responsibility, our responsibility." He moved closer, his presence solid and steady. "I missed the first 8 months of this pregnancy. I wasn't there for the doctor's appointments, the morning sickness, any of it. Let me be here now." Noah chose that moment to let out a happy squeal, drawing both their attention. His tiny hands reached toward them, and the simple gesture carried the weight of everything unspoken between them. "I need to think about it," Beatrice said finally. Mike nodded, respecting her space even as concern lingered in his eyes. "The stew's in the blue container. Easy to reheat." After he left, Beatrice sat in the growing darkness of her apartment, watching Noah drift off to sleep. Her mind wandered to the previous weekend, when Mike had insisted on taking them grocery shopping. He'd pushed the cart with Noah's carrier secured safely on top, fielding curious glances from other shoppers with a quiet dignity that surprised her. They didn't look like a typical family. The tall white mechanic with his careful movements, the tired but proud black woman with her wild curls tamed into a bun, and their beautiful brown baby who seemed to have inherited the best of them both. But maybe, Beatrice thought, that was exactly what made them special. Her phone buzzed with a text from her co-worker at the diner. "You coming in tonight? Wednesday rush is starting." Beatrice looked at the message, then at Noah, then at the blue container of stew sitting on her counter. The weight of decisions pressed down on her shoulders, but for the first time it didn't feel like she was carrying it alone. She called her manager. "Lynette, I need to talk to you about my schedule." The conversation was brief, but decisive. When she hung up, Beatrice felt something shift inside her. Not defeat, but perhaps the first tentative steps toward acceptance, toward trust. She warmed up the stew and had to admit it was delicious. As she ate, she composed a text to Mike. "Noah has a doctor's appointment next Tuesday at 2. If you're free." His response came quickly. "I'll be there." That night, as Beatrice lay in bed listening to Noah's soft breathing through the baby monitor, she thought about her mother's favorite saying, "God gives you what you need, not what you think you want." She'd always assumed it meant learning, to live with disappointment, with less than your dreams. But maybe, just maybe, it meant something else entirely. The next morning brought a new routine. Instead of rushing to get Noah ready for his babysitter before her bookstore shift, Beatrice took her time. She let him feel the morning sunlight on his face, narrating the world to him as she'd seen Mike do. "See that, baby boy? That's a cardinal, red like those blocks your daddy brought you." The word daddy felt strange on her tongue, but Noah's delighted gurgle made it feel right somehow. Her phone buzzed again, another text from Mike. "Installed the new car seat in your car last night after you went in. Left the manual on your seat. Has better side impact protection?" Beatrice smiled despite herself. It was such a Mike thing to do, showing care through actions rather than words. She remembered their first proper conversation after Noah's birth, how awkward and uncertain everything had felt. Now, barely 3 weeks later, they were developing their own language of co-parenting, built on small gestures and growing trust. When she left the apartment that morning, Beatrice noticed something else new, a small potted plant by her door, its purple flowers bright against the grey concrete of the walkway. No note, but she knew who it was from. Mike had mentioned once, almost in passing, that every home should have something growing in it. These changes, these small additions to her carefully ordered life, should have felt like invasions. Instead, they felt like the pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known she was building, a picture of what family could look like, even if it didn't match the standard template. As she buckled Noah into his new car seat, Beatrice allowed herself to imagine a future different from the one she'd planned. Not easier, perhaps, but richer, more complex, more real. "One day at a time," she whispered to Noah, who responded with one of his bright, gummy smiles. "We're figuring it out, aren't we, baby boy?" And they were. Step by step, choice by choice, they were building something unique. A family shaped by circumstance, but strengthened by choice. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. The Ohio summer. Storm hit without warning, turning the afternoon sky an ominous shade of green. Thunder rolled across the city as Beatrice rushed through the parking lot of Mercy General, shielding Noah from the first heavy drops of rain. They were already running late for his 2-month checkup, and now this. Inside the pediatrician's office, she found Mike already waiting, his work boots leaving damp prints on the linoleum floor. The sight of him, straight from his shop, but clearly freshly cleaned up, made something flutter in her chest. "Sorry we're late," she started, but Mike was already moving to help her with the baby carrier, his hands sure and practiced now. "Roads are getting bad," he said, his eyes checking Noah for any signs of distress from the storm. "Good thing I got here early." The waiting room was oddly quiet, most appointments probably cancelled due to the weather. Noah, however, seemed fascinated by the ceiling fan spinning lazily above them, his eyes tracking its movement, while Mike gently dried his face with a soft cloth he pulled from his pocket. "Mr. and Miss Ellison?" the nurse called. "Monroe," Beatrice corrected automatically. "I'm Ms. Monroe, we're not—" She gestured vaguely between herself and Mike, who had gone very still beside her. The nurse's smile never wavered. "Of course. Right this way, please." The examination room felt smaller with both of them in it, the space charged with an energy that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Dr. Martinez entered with a warm smile, her dark eyes taking in the tableau before her. Mike standing. Protectively near the door, Beatrice perched on the edge of the examination table with Noah, the distance between them both too much and not enough. "How's our little man doing?" Dr. Martinez asked, beginning her examination. "He's sleeping better," Beatrice reported, "and his appetite is good." "Very good," Mike added. "He finished an entire extra ounce this morning." The doctor nodded approvingly, checking Noah's responses and growth. "He's developing beautifully. Strong neck control, good eye tracking." She paused, making notes, and clearly well loved. Something in her tone made Beatrice glance at Mike. He was watching Noah with such naked adoration that it made her heart clench. This was the man who'd been a stranger 2 months ago, who now knew their son's feeding schedule by heart and could change a diaper in record time. The examination continued, with both parents hanging on every word, every measurement. When Dr. Martinez mentioned Noah's weight gain, Mike pulled out a small notebook where he'd been tracking the numbers. Beatrice hadn't even known he was doing that. "Any questions?" Dr. Martinez asked finally. They both spoke at once. "The rash?" Beatrice started. His breathing, Mike began. They looked at each other, surprised, then smiled slightly. Dr. Martinez watched the exchange with knowing eyes. "The rash first," she said, "then breathing." After the appointment, they found themselves trapped by the intensifying storm. The parking lot had become a small lake, and tornado warnings flashed on both their phones. "You can't drive in this," Mike said, watching the wind bend trees sideways. "My place is 10 minutes away. We should wait it out there." Beatrice hesitated. They'd never been to Mike's home. It felt like crossing a boundary they hadn't discussed. A crack of thunder made the decision for them, as Noah startled in his carrier. "Okay," she said, "lead the way." Mike's house was exactly what she'd expected, and nothing like it at all. The exterior was plain, practical, a small ranch-style home with a well-maintained yard, but inside— "You built all this?" Beatrice asked, running her hand along a beautifully crafted wooden bookshelf that spanned one wall. Mike shrugged, but she could see the pride in his eyes. "Keeps my hands busy, when I can't sleep." The living room was warm and surprisingly cozy, with handmade furniture and carefully chosen details. A guitar stood in one corner, and black and white photographs, mostly landscapes, decorated the walls. It was the home of someone who took care in creating their space, even if they lived alone. "The nursery's through here," he said quietly, leading them down a short hallway. Beatrice stopped in the doorway, her breath catching. The room was perfect, a crib he must have built himself, walls painted a soft green, a rocking chair by the window. Everything a baby could need. "When did you—" She couldn't finish the question. "Been working on it since the hospital," Mike admitted. "Just in case, and for visits, you know, or if you ever needed—" He trailed off, running his hand over his head nervously. Noah chose that moment to fuss, ready for his feeding. Without discussion, they fell into their routine, Beatrice preparing the bottle while Mike changed him, both moving around each other with practiced ease. In the kitchen, Beatrice noticed more details. A high chair tucked in the corner, cabinet locks already installed, a container of the specific formula brand they used prominently displayed. "You've really thought about everything," she said softly. Mike paused in the doorway, Noah calming against his chest. "I want to do this right," he said simply, "whatever this is." The storm raged outside, but in Mike's kitchen, with Noah contentedly taking his bottle, Beatrice felt a different kind of weather system brewing, one made of quiet moments and careful choices, of boundaries slowly shifting and trust carefully built. "Tell me about the photographs," she said, nodding toward the living room. Mike's face lit up slightly. "Used to do some amateur photography before the shop got busy. There's this place up by Lake Erie." As he talked, Beatrice watched him. The way he gestured with his free hand. How naturally he adjusted Noah when the baby squirmed. The passion in his voice when he described capturing just the right light. This was a side of him she hadn't seen before, and she found herself wanting to know more. The afternoon stretched into evening, the storm showing no signs of letting up. They ended up ordering delivery from the one brave pizza place still operating, sitting on Mike's comfortable couch while Noah slept peacefully in the portable crib Mike had somehow already prepared. "I should feel strange about all this," Beatrice said finally, gesturing to the nursery, the baby supplies, the evidence of how much thought and effort Mike had put into preparing for a family he wasn't sure he'd ever have properly in his home. "Do you?" Mike asked, his voice careful. Beatrice considered the question, really considered it. "No," she said finally, "and maybe that's what scares me most." Outside, the storm began to fade, but neither of them moved to leave. Sometimes, Beatrice was learning, shelter could be found in the most unexpected places and in the most unexpected people. Later, as Mike helped her load a sleeping Noah into her car, she turned to him. "Thank you," she said, meaning more than just the shelter from the storm. "Anytime," he replied, and they both knew he meant it. "Drive safe." As Beatrice drove home through the rain-washed streets, she thought about the nursery Mike had built, about the love evident in every careful detail. She thought about boundaries and trust, about fate and choice, about the family they were accidentally building. Maybe, she realized, some storms come not to destroy, but to clear the air, to make room for something new to grow. The first real test of their carefully constructed routine came on a Tuesday morning when Beatrice's phone rang at 6 a.m. Noah had just fallen back asleep after his early feeding, and she answered quickly before the ring could wake him. "Honey, it's your Uncle Marcus." Her mother's voice came through, tight with worry. "He's had a heart attack. We're at Cleveland Memorial." Beatrice sat up straight, her heart pounding. Uncle Marcus, the man who'd taught her to ride a bike, who'd helped pay for her first semester of college before she'd had to drop out, who'd been more of a father than her own had ever been. "I'm coming," she said immediately, then froze. Noah. Work. Mike was scheduled for a huge electrical installation today, the contract he'd been talking about for weeks. Her mother seemed to read her mind. "I know you have the baby, sweetie. Maybe you could—" "I'll figure it out." Beatrice cut in, already moving to pack a diaper bag. "I'll be there." But when she called Mike, his phone went straight to voicemail. She tried 3 more times while getting Noah dressed, each call increasing her anxiety. Finally, she called his shop. "Ellison Electric," an unfamiliar voice answered. "I need to speak to Mike. It's urgent." "Mr. Ellison's already headed to get the Madison Street site. Big install today, can't really interrupt." "This is Beatrice, Noah's mother." She hated using that card, hated the way her voice cracked. "Please, it's an emergency." There was a pause, then, "I'll radio him, hold on." The next 10 minutes felt like hours. Noah, sensing her distress, began to fuss in his carrier. When Mike finally called back, Beatrice was near tears. "What's wrong?" His voice was sharp with concern. "Is Noah—" "He's fine," she said quickly. "But my uncle, he's had a heart attack, Cleveland Memorial. I need to go, but I can't take Noah to a hospital, and the daycare doesn't open until 8, and I know—" "Today is huge for you, but—" "Text me the address," Mike interrupted. "I'll be at your place in 20 minutes. "But your installation—" "Family comes first." The firmness in his voice brooked no argument. 20 minutes, Beatrice." True to his word, Mike's truck pulled up 18 minutes later. He was in his work clothes, tool belt still attached, looking like he'd dropped everything mid-task. "Go," he said, already taking Noah's carrier. "I'll call the client, reschedule. Don't worry about anything here." Beatrice felt tears threatening again, but for a different reason now. "Mike, your contract will still be there tomorrow." His free hand caught her shoulder, steadying her. "This is your uncle, the one who helped raise you?" At her nod, his grip tightened slightly. "Then go, we've got this covered." She wanted to argue, to point out all the ways this could disrupt the delicate balance they'd built. Instead, she found herself leaning forward, pressing a quick kiss to Noah's forehead, then, surprising them both, squeezing Mike's hand. "Thank you," she whispered, then turned and ran to her car before she could second-guess anything else. The drive to Cleveland was a blur of worry and unexpected gratitude. Between updates from her mother, Beatrice's phone buzzed with messages from Mike. Pictures of Noah napping, updates about feedings, even a video of him singing softly while changing a diaper. Each message anchored her, reminded her she wasn't alone anymore. At the hospital, she found her mother in the waiting room, looking small and tired. "They're running tests," she said, pulling Beatrice close. "But he's stable." Then, noticing Beatrice was alone. "The baby!" "With his father," Beatrice said, and was surprised by how natural the words felt now. Her mother's eyebrows rose slightly. "The same man who—" She trailed off diplomatically. "Yes." Beatrice pulled out her phone, showing her mother the latest picture Mike had sent. Noah sleeping peacefully in the nursery at Mike's house. He's trying, Mum. Really trying." Her mother studied the picture for a long moment. "A white man," she said finally, her tone careful. "You know that won't always be easy, baby." "I know." Beatrice sank into a chair. "But he's good with Noah. He's responsible. He's present. She gestured helplessly. "He cancelled a huge contract today just to take care of his son, no questions asked." Her mother's expression softened slightly. "And how do you feel about him?" The question caught Beatrice off guard. We're not. Baby girl, I've known you since before you took your first breath. I see the way your voice changes when you talk about him." Before Beatrice could respond, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a picture of Mike's living room, where he'd apparently set up a makeshift play area. The message read, "Hope your uncle's doing better. Noah's been practicing his tummy time. Pretty sure he's going to be crawling by dinner." Beatrice found herself smiling despite the stress of the day. Then she caught her mother watching her and quickly locked her phone. "It's complicated," she said finally. "Love usually is," her mother replied simply. "Mom, I didn't say anything. About—" "You didn't have to." They sat in silence for a while, waiting for news about Uncle Marcus. Around them, the hospital hummed with its particular rhythm of urgency and pause. Beatrice's phone continued to buzz periodically. Mike keeping her updated, keeping her connected to Noah's day. At one point, he sent a message that made her breath catch. "Found that jazz playlist you mentioned liking. Noah seems to approve. Been dancing with him in the kitchen between bottles. Hope that's okay." She could picture it so clearly. Mike's large frame swaying gently with their son, his usual intensity softened by tenderness. The image made her chest ache with something she wasn't ready to name. "He asked about you, you know," her mother said suddenly. "Marcus did last Sunday at church. Wanted to know if you were happy?" Beatrice turned to her mother, surprised. "What did you tell him?" "That you were figuring it out." Her mother reached over, taking her hand. "That sometimes life gives you exactly what you need, even if it comes in unexpected packaging." Later that night, when Uncle Marcus was settled into recovery and Beatrice finally headed home, she found herself driving to Mike's house instead of her apartment. It was well past midnight, but a light was still on. Mike opened the door before she could knock, Noah sleeping soundly against his chest. Neither of them spoke as she stepped inside, as Mike carefully transferred their son to her arms, as the weight of the day finally caught up with her. "He's going to be okay," she whispered, meaning her uncle but somehow meaning everything else too. Mike nodded, his hand ghosting over her shoulder in that steadying way she was beginning to rely on. "You should stay," he said quietly. "It's late, you're tired, the nursery's ready." Beatrice knew she should say no. Knew they needed boundaries, needed to keep things clear and simple. Instead, she found herself nodding. Sometimes, she was learning, the most complicated choice could also be the simplest. Sometimes, falling felt a lot like flying. And sometimes, family meant rewriting all the rules you thought you knew. The morning light filtered through unfamiliar curtains as Beatrice woke, momentarily disoriented. Then she remembered Mike's guest room, the late-night drive, the emotional weight of the previous day. She could hear soft movements from the kitchen, the gentle clink of cups and plates, the low murmur of Mike's voice presumably talking to Noah. She found them in the kitchen, Mike attempting to eat his breakfast one-handed while balancing Noah in the other arm. Their son was wide awake, fascinated by his father's fork. "Morning," Mike said, looking up. Something flickered in his eyes when he saw her, her curls wild from sleep, wearing the same clothes from yesterday. "Coffee's fresh." The domesticity of the moment hit her hard. This could be their life. Morning coffee, shared breakfast, the three of them together. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. "Any word from the hospital?" Mike asked, skillfully shifting Noah as he reached for his coffee. "Mom texted earlier. Uncle Marcus had a good night." Beatrice poured herself a cup, inhaling the rich aroma. "They're hopeful." Mike nodded, relief evident in his expression. He'd never met Marcus, but he understood what the man meant to Beatrice. "The client was understanding about yesterday," he offered. "Rescheduled for next week." "Mike, I'm so sorry about—" "Don't." His voice was gentle but firm. "Family emergencies happen. That's why I'm my own boss." There it was again, that word, family. It hung between them, loaded with meaning neither was ready to fully address. Noah squealed, reaching for Beatrice. As she took him, her fingers brushed Mike's chest, and the contact sent an unexpected jolt through her. Their eyes met, held, then quickly looked away. "I should get home," Beatrice said, though her apartment suddenly felt less like home than this warm kitchen with its morning light and coffee scent. "Change clothes, check messages." "Stay," Mike said, then quickly added, "for breakfast at least. I'm making French toast. Your favorite." She blinked. "How did you know that's my favorite?" "You mentioned it." That night at the diner, he trailed off, both of them remembering their first meeting 8 months ago. The connection had been instant, electric. They talked for hours over coffee and French toast, sharing pieces of themselves neither usually revealed. "That was a good night," Beatrice said softly, surprising them both. Mike's hand stilled on the counter. "Yeah," he agreed, his voice rough. "It was." The air between them grew thick with unspoken words. Noah, oblivious to the tension, happily played with Beatrice's necklace. "I should call my mom," Beatrice said finally, breaking the moment. "Update her on Noah." Mike's expression shifted slightly. "How did that go? Telling her about all this?" Beatrice thought about her mother's knowing looks, her careful questions. "She's protective, wants to make sure I'm not setting myself up for heartbreak." "And are you?" The question was barely a whisper. Before Beatrice could answer, Noah began to fuss, saving her from a truth she wasn't ready to face. The morning dissolved into their usual routine, feeding, changing, the 100 small tasks that came with caring for an infant. But something had shifted. Maybe it was the intimacy of sharing a home, even for one night. Maybe it was the way Mike kept finding excuses to brush past her, or how she couldn't stop noticing the strength in his hands as he cradled their son. "I've been thinking," Mike said as he walked them to her car later. "The apartment complex where you live, the neighborhood's getting rough." Beatrice tensed. She'd noticed, too, the increased police presence, the new graffiti, the groups of young men hanging around late at night. "I can handle it." "I know. You can." Mike's voice was careful, measured. "But you shouldn't have to, not with Noah. What are you suggesting?" He ran a hand over his head, a sure sign he was nervous. "There's a rental house, 3 blocks from me. Owner's an old client, looking for reliable tenants." Beatrice's heart stuttered. "Mike, just think about it," he said quickly. "It's a good neighborhood, close to the park, fenced yard, and—" he hesitated. "It would be easier. For all of us." The implications hung in the air, closer to him, more time together, more moments like this morning. "I need time," she said finally, "to think." Mike nodded, but she could see the hope in his eyes. As she buckled Noah into his car seat, she felt Mike's presence, behind her solid and warm. "Beatrice," he said softly. She turned, finding him closer than expected. "About last night, having you both here." "Don't," she whispered, but didn't step back. His hand came up, hesitating near her face before dropping. "I miss you sometimes," he admitted, "even when you're right here." The words hit her like a physical force, because she felt it too. The constant awareness of him, the way her body gravitated toward his, the electricity that had never really faded since that first night. "We can't," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It would complicate everything." "Maybe," Mike agreed, "or maybe it would simplify things." Noah made a small sound from his car seat, drawing their attention. Their son, this beautiful, unexpected gift, who had brought them together and kept them apart. "I'll think about the house," Beatrice said finally, stepping back. "That's all I can promise." Mike nodded, understanding. "That's all I'm asking." As she drove away, Beatrice couldn't stop her mind from wandering to that kitchen scene. The 3 of them sharing breakfast, morning light painting everything in shades of gold. It had felt right in a way she hadn't expected, dangerous in its perfection. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Marcus is asking about you and the baby, and your young man." Beatrice stared at those words, "your young man," and felt something crack in her carefully constructed walls. Because that's what Mike was becoming, wasn't he? Not just Noah's father, not just a co-parent, but something more, something that scared her and thrilled her in equal measure. In his car seat, Noah cooed at his reflection in the mirror. Beatrice caught his eye in the rearview mirror and smiled. "What do you think, little man?" she asked softly. "Should we take a chance?" Noah's only answer was a happy gurgle, but somehow it felt like enough. The house was perfect. Of course it was perfect. Beatrice stood in the empty living room, sunlight, streaming through large windows, hardwood floors gleaming beneath her feet. Mike was in the backyard with Noah, pointing out birds to their increasingly alert 4-month-old, giving her space to process. Monthly rent includes utilities, the property manager, Mrs. Henderson, explained. And honestly, knowing it's Mike, Ellison's recommendation makes this a much easier decision. He's done work for half the neighborhood. Beatrice nodded, trying to ignore the warmth that spread through her chest at the respect in the older woman's voice when she spoke of Mike. Instead, she focused on practical matters, the updated electrical system, Mike's work, of course, the new security features, the fenced yard. "There's one more thing," Mrs. Henderson said, pulling out a folder. "Given your situation—" "My situation?" "A single mother working part-time." The woman's voice was kind but professional. "We typically require first and last month's rent plus security deposit." Beatrice's heart sank. Even with her reduced hours at the bookstore, even with Mike's help with Noah's expenses, that kind of money up front was beyond her reach. "However," Mrs. Henderson continued, "someone has already covered those costs." Beatrice froze. "What?" "Mr. Ellison handled it last week, said to consider it an investment in his son's future." The walls suddenly felt too close. Beatrice mumbled an excuse and stepped outside, gulping in the cool autumn air. Mike looked up from where he sat with Noah in the grass, his smile fading when he saw her expression. "You had no right," she said, her voice trembling. Mike stood, carefully shifting Noah to his hip. "Beatrice, no." She cut him off, anger and something else, fear maybe, coursing through her. "You can't just... This is too much. You're trying to control. I'm trying to help." The frustration in his voice matched hers. "This neighborhood is safer. The schools are better. Noah deserves... Don't you dare use our son to manipulate me." The words hung between them like shattered glass. Noah, sensing the tension, began to whimper. "Is that what you think I'm doing?" Mike's voice was dangerously quiet. "Manipulating? You? I don't know what to think anymore." Beatrice wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm day. "Everything's getting so complicated." "Life is complicated." Mike bounced Noah gently, soothing him. "But some things are simple. I want my son safe. I want you both close. I want—" He stopped abruptly, looking away. "What?" Beatrice demanded. "What do you want, Mike?" He met her eyes then, and the intensity there made her breath catch. "You know what I want. You've known since that morning in my kitchen." Memory flashed. Morning light, coffee steam, the electric tension between them. "We can't," she whispered. "Why not?" "Because—" Her voice rose, startling a bird from a nearby tree. "Because if this goes wrong, it's not just us who get hurt. It's Noah, it's this whole life we're building, it's—" "And if it goes right?" Mike stepped closer, Noah still cradled between them. "What then?" Beatrice looked at their son, at his. Perfect brown skin and curious eyes, at the way he fit so naturally in his father's arms. "I can't lose this," she admitted finally. "What we have now, it's working, it's safe. Safe isn't always right." Mike's free hand came up, hesitating near her face before dropping again, a gesture that had become familiar, laden with unspoken desire. "And what we have now, it's not enough anymore, is it?" Before she could answer, Mrs. Henderson called from the porch, reminding them of her presence. Beatrice stepped back, grateful for the interruption. "I need to think," she said. Mike nodded, but his eyes held hers. "About the house or about us?" "Both." Later that night in her apartment, Beatrice sat in the darkness watching Noah sleep. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Marcus is coming home tomorrow, wants to meet his great-nephew, and Mike." Another crack in her carefully constructed walls. Because, of course, Uncle Marcus would want to meet Mike. Of course, her family would want to know the man who had become such an integral part of their lives. Of course, the lines between co-parents and something more would keep blurring until... Her phone buzzed again. "Mike, I'm sorry about the money. Should have talked to you first. But I'm not sorry about wanting to keep you both safe." Tears pricked at her eyes as she typed back, "I know. The house is yours if you want it. No strings, no expectations. Just a father wanting the best for his son. Beatrice stared at the message, at the simplicity of his words that somehow contained multitudes, because they both knew it wasn't just about Noah anymore. It hadn't been for a while. Another text from Mike. But if you're ready for more, I'm here, I've been here. The truth of those words hit her like a physical force. He had been there, through doctor's appointments and late-night feedings, through family emergencies and everyday victories. He'd built a nursery before he knew he'd be allowed to use it. He'd changed his entire life to fit them into it. And she'd been holding back, protecting herself, protecting Noah. Or maybe just hiding from the intensity of what she felt every time Mike looked at her, like she was everything he'd never known he wanted. Her fingers hovered over the phone. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, reminding her of why they'd looked at the house in the first place. Noah stirred in his sleep, one tiny hand reaching out. Finally, she typed, "Come over tomorrow after work, we need to talk." His response was immediate. "I'll be there." Beatrice set her phone down and moved to the window, looking out at the city lights. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another, because Mike was right. What they had now wasn't enough anymore. The question was, were they ready for what came next? In his crib, Noah sighed in his sleep, and Beatrice found herself smiling despite her anxiety. Because maybe some risks were worth taking, maybe some complications were worth embracing, maybe love, real, messy, unexpected love, was worth fighting for. Even if it meant rewriting every rule she'd ever made about keeping her heart safe. The knock came at exactly 7 p.m. Beatrice had spent the day in a state of nervous anticipation, cleaning her already clean apartment, organizing Noah's toys, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from racing. Now, standing at the door, she took a deep breath before opening it. Mike stood there, still in his work clothes but freshly showered, holding a paper bag from the diner where they'd first met. "Thought you might be hungry," he said softly. "French toast. For old times' sake." The gesture threatened to undo her carefully prepared composure, because of course he'd remember. Of course he'd know exactly how to make this conversation both easier and infinitely more complicated. "Noah's asleep," she said, stepping back to let him in. Finally got the hang of his new bedtime routine. Mike nodded, setting the food on her small kitchen counter. His presence seemed to fill the apartment, making it feel simultaneously smaller and more like home. "Good day at the shop." "Don't." Beatrice's voice was gentle but firm. Let's do small talk, not tonight." He turned to face her, leaning against the counter. "Okay, you wanted to talk, let's talk." Beatrice had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times in her head, but now, faced with Mike's steady gaze, all her practiced words fled. Instead, she found herself asking, "Why did you pay for the house?" "You know why." "Tell me anyway." Mike ran a hand over his head, a gesture she'd come to read as him gathering his thoughts. "Because I wake up every night checking the police scanner for this neighborhood. Because Noah deserves a yard to play in, not a concrete parking lot. Because—" He paused, meeting her eyes. "Because every time you leave my house to drive back here, it feels wrong." "Mike." "No, let me finish." He straightened, taking a step toward her. "I know you're independent. I know you're strong. It's one of the things I—" He swallowed hard. "But being strong doesn't mean you have to do everything alone. Not anymore." Beatrice felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "It's not just about the house." "No," he agreed. "It's not." "We have a good thing going," she said, voicing her biggest fear. "Co-parenting, sharing responsibilities. It works. What if we ruin it? What if we make it better?" Mike's voice was low, intense. "What if all this, the house, the shared dinners, the way we move around each other like we've been doing it for years, what if it's just the beginning? And what if it ends?" Beatrice wrapped her arms around herself. "What if we try and it falls apart? What happens to Noah then?" "Then we figure it out." Mike took another step closer. "Because that's what we do, Beatrice. We figure things out, together." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning, because he was right. They had been figuring things out together from the moment he'd walked into that hospital room. "I'm scared," she admitted finally. "Of what?" of how much I want this. The truth spilled out before she could stop it. Of how right it feels when we're all together. Of how much I think about that morning in your kitchen and every moment since then. Mike's breath caught audibly. Beatrice, no, let me finish. She met his eyes. I'm scared because I've never felt like this before. Not even that first night at the diner. This is bigger, deeper. This is looking at you with Noah and seeing everything I never knew I wanted. He moved then, closing the distance between them until she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Tell me to step back, he whispered. Tell me I'm reading this wrong. Instead of answering, Beatrice reached up, her hand finding the back of his neck. The contact sent electricity through her veins. We need rules, she said, even as she drew him closer. Boundaries. Anything you need. His hands found her waist, tentative but sure. We take it slow. Slow, he agreed, though his eyes had dropped to her lips. We put Noah first. Always. Always? They were breathing the same air now, the tension of months of holding back crackling between them. If this goes wrong, Beatrice started. It won't. Mike's forehead pressed against hers. But if it does, we'll handle it, like we handle everything else. Together, she whispered. Together. When their lips finally met, it was both familiar and entirely new. Different from their first kiss 8 months ago, charged with all the history they'd built since then. Mike kissed her like he'd been waiting a lifetime to do it, like he was memorizing every second. His hands stayed respectfully at her waist, but Beatrice could feel the restraint in his touch. She broke away first, needing to catch her breath to think. But Mike's arms kept her close as if, now that he could hold her, he never wanted to let go. The house, she said against his chest, hearing his heart race under her ear. What about it? I'll take it. She looked up at him. But I'm paying you back. Every cent. A smile tugged at his lips. We can discuss terms later. I mean it. Mike. I know you do. He brushed a curl from her face, the gesture achingly tender. And I love that about you. The words slipped out so naturally that it took them both a moment to realize what he'd said. When they did, Mike tensed slightly, but didn't take it back. Too fast, he asked quietly. Beatrice considered the question, thought about all the moments that had led them here, shared meals and midnight feedings, worried phone calls and quiet victories, the way he looked at Noah, the way he looked at her. No, she said finally. Not fast enough. From the nursery, Noah's cry broke the moment. They pulled apart slowly, reluctantly, but there was something different now in the way they moved together toward their son's room. Something settled and, sure, like pieces falling into place. Later, after Noah was settled and the French toast was shared between soft kisses and softer conversations, Beatrice watched Mike preparing to leave. He moved differently now, like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Stay, she found herself saying. He turned, surprise and hope warring on his face. What happened to taking it slow? Just to sleep, she clarified, though her body hummed with other possibilities. I'm tired of watching you leave. Mike's smile was worth every fear she'd overcome to get to this moment. I'm tired of leaving. As they lay in her bed that night, Noah sleeping peacefully in the next room, Beatrice felt the last of her walls crumbling, because this, Mike's, steady breathing beside her, their fingers intertwined, the promise of tomorrow. This felt like coming home. We're really doing this, she whispered into the darkness. Mike's arm tightened around her. We really are. And for the first time, Beatrice let herself believe that sometimes the scariest choices led to the most beautiful outcomes. That sometimes love was worth the risk. That sometimes family meant rewriting all the rules, only to find that the new story was better than anything you could have planned. Moving day dawned bright and clear, the October sun painting the neighborhood in shades of gold and amber. Beatrice stood in her empty apartment, Noah strapped to her chest in his carrier, taking in the bare walls and empty corners that had sheltered them for the past 5 months. Ready? Mike's voice came from the doorway. He'd insisted on handling, most of the heavy lifting himself, though his friends from the shop had shown up uninvited with a truck and willing hands. Almost, she said, running her hand along the kitchen counter one last time. Just saying goodbye. Mike moved behind her, his hand finding the small of her back. The touch was still new enough to send shivers down her spine, familiar enough to feel like home. Having second thoughts? No. She turned to face him, Noah cooing happily between them. Just remembering. This is where we became a family. His eyes softened. No, he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. We became a family the moment you called me at the hospital. This is just where we figured it out. The past 3 weeks, since their conversation had been a whirlwind of change, the house, their house now, though Beatrice insisted on maintaining separate bedrooms until they were both ready, had slowly transformed from an empty space into a home. Mike's handmade, furniture mixed with her carefully chosen pieces, Noah's toys scattered across newly polished floors. Ms. Monroe, one of Mike's workers, appeared in the doorway. The truck's loaded, just need your sign-off on the final walkthrough. Beatrice nodded, following him out. As she handled the last details of her lease, she could hear Mike in the parking lot, directing the placement of furniture in the truck with the same precision he used in his electrical work. Are your man's good people? Her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Washington, said as she passed. Helped me fix my porch light last week. Wouldn't take a dime. Beatrice smiled, warmth spreading through her chest, because that was Mike, always fixing, always helping, always trying to make the world a little better for the people around him. The drive to their new home was short, but it felt momentous. Beatrice followed the moving truck in her car, watching through the rearview mirror as Noah drifted off to sleep. When they pulled up to the house, she was surprised to see several cars already parked outside. Hope you don't mind, Mike said, opening her car door. Some people wanted to welcome you properly. On the porch stood her mother, Uncle Marcus, looking frail but happy in his wheelchair, and a small group of neighbors, including Mrs. Henderson. Through the front window, Beatrice could see balloons and what looked suspiciously like a welcome banner. You did all this? She asked, throat tight with emotion. Actually, Mike rubbed the back of his neck, your mom organized it. Said every new home needs a proper blessing. Beatrice looked at him sharply. You and my mom have been talking? She might have called me a few times. He looked slightly sheepish. Wanted to make sure I understood what I was getting into, with both of you. Before Beatrice could respond, her mother was descending the porch steps, arms outstretched. There's my grandbaby, she crooned, expertly lifting a now-awake Noah from his car seat. Then, to Beatrice's surprise, she turned and hugged Mike just as warmly. You got the good coffee I told you about? Yes, ma'am. And the sweet potato pie. Recipe you sent. Beatrice watched, amazed, as her mother led Mike up the porch steps, already deep in conversation about holiday plans and family recipes. Uncle Marcus caught her eye and winked, his smile knowing. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Furniture was moved in, rooms took shape, and somehow her mother produced a full lunch spread that fed everyone. Through it all, Mike moved with quiet confidence, directing traffic and solving problems, always seeming to know exactly where Beatrice needed him to be. It wasn't until late afternoon, when the visitors had left and Noah was napping in his new room, that Beatrice found a moment to really process everything. She stood in the kitchen, their kitchen, watching through the window as Mike thanked the last of his workers. Penny, for your thoughts? Uncle Marcus's voice came from behind her. He'd insisted on staying a bit longer, claiming he needed to rest before the drive home. Just, Beatrice gestured vaguely at the scene outside. All of this, it's a lot. Good lot or bad lot? Good, she said firmly. Scary good. Marcus wheeled closer, taking her hand. You know what I see when I look at that man out there? What? I see someone who builds things to last. He squeezed her fingers. Not just houses and furniture, families too. Tears pricked at Beatrice's eyes. I know. Your mama told me about the night you met him. Said you came home different, lighter somehow. I did? Beatrice tried to remember that night at the diner, how easy it had been to talk to Mike, how time had seemed to stop. Then you got scared, Marcus continued. Tried to handle everything alone, just like your daddy taught you to. Uncle Marcus. But baby girl, being strong doesn't mean being lonely, and being careful doesn't mean being closed off. He looked up at her, his eyes wise and gentle. That man out there, he's building a life around you and that baby. Not because he has to, but because he wants to. Because he sees what I've always seen in you, something worth building for. The back door opened then, Mike stepping in with sawdust in his hair and love in his eyes. He paused, sensing the moment between them. "Everything okay?" he asked, softly. Beatrice looked at him, really looked at him, at the man who'd turned his life upside down for a son he hadn't known about. Who'd built a nursery before he had permission to use it, who'd learned her coffee order and her mother's recipes and all the small details that made up her world. "Yeah," she said, moving toward him. "Everything's perfect." Later that night, after Marcus had gone home and Noah was settled in his crib, Beatrice found Mike in the backyard. He was sitting on the porch steps, looking up at the stars. "I have something to show you," he said, as she sat beside him. From his pocket, he pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Been working on this for when you're ready." It was a sketch, detailed, professional, of a small commercial space. In the corner, she recognized the logo she'd doodled once, while dreaming about her own cafe. "Mike." She couldn't finish, too overwhelmed by what the drawing represented. "There's a space," he said quietly, 3 blocks from here, owner's retiring, looking to sell. Good bones, needs some work, but—" He turned to face her. "I know it's your dream, the cafe with the mother's corner, and I thought maybe it could be our dream now." Beatrice stared at the sketch, at the future it promised. "We just moved in," she protested weakly. "The house payment is handled. And this?" He tapped the drawing. "This is what I'm good at, building things, making spaces work. The rest, the business side, the atmosphere, the heart of it, that's all you." She looked up at him then, this man who seemed determined to make all her dreams come true. "Why?" "Because I love you," he said simply. "Because I love the family we're building. Because seeing you happy makes me happy." He smiled slightly. "And because I really like your coffee." Beatrice laughed through her tears, leaning into him. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling right and true and perfect. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient dance, witnessing another promise, another dream, another step in the journey of a family being built, one loving choice at a time. Spring came to Ohio in gentle waves of green, bringing with it the sweet scent of new beginnings. Beatrice stood in the empty commercial space that would soon become her cafe, watching as Mike installed the last of the electrical fixtures. Sunlight streamed through the newly cleaned windows, catching the dust motes that danced in the air. Noah, now 8 months old and newly crawling, explored the space from the safety of his playpen, occasionally pulling himself up to stand while holding onto the sides. His laughter echoed off the bare walls whenever Mike made funny faces at him between tasks. "Just one more thing," Mike said, descending the ladder. He flipped a switch and strings of warm cafe lights illuminated the ceiling, creating a soft, welcoming glow. "What do you think?" Beatrice took in the space, the corner that would become the mother's nook with comfortable chairs and a small play area, the exposed brick walls Mike had carefully restored, the counter where she would serve her carefully crafted coffees and homemade pastries. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Almost perfect," Mike corrected, moving to stand behind her. His arms wrapped around her waist, and she leaned back into his solid warmth. "Still need the sign outside." The sign. Beatrice smiled, remembering their playful arguments about the name. They'd finally settled on Monroe's Haven, a tribute to both her family name and the feeling she wanted to create in the space. 2 weeks until opening day, she mused, watching Noah pull himself up again. "Think we'll be ready?" "We're ready now." Mike's voice held that quiet confidence she'd come to rely on. "The contractor finished the kitchen installation yesterday. The health inspection is scheduled for next week, and your mother's already planning to teach you how to make her famous sweet potato pie." Beatrice turned in his arms, studying his face. The past few months had changed them both. Mike's eyes held a perpetual spark of joy now, the shadows of his solitary past replaced by the light of their shared present. And she had learned to lean into love, To trust that sometimes the best plans were the ones life made for you. Remember that night at the diner? She asked suddenly. When we first met? Mike's smile was soft with memory. You were reading a book about starting small businesses. Wouldn't let me see the cover. Because I was embarrassed, she admitted. Here I was, working 2 jobs, barely making ends meet, dreaming about owning my own cafe someday. And now, look at you. His hand cupped her cheek. Business owner, amazing mother, the strongest person I know. Look at us, she corrected gently. From his playpen, Noah called out Dada, a new development that still made Mike's eyes light up every time. They turned to watch as their son, growing more confident by the day, took one wobbling step before plopping down on his padded bottom. Did he just? Beatrice gasped. He did. Mike was already moving to the playpen, scooping Noah up with practiced ease. That's my boy, showing off for Mama, huh? Beatrice joined them, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. This was her family, not the one she'd planned for, but the one life had given her, better than any dream she could have crafted on her own. I have something for you, Mike said, shifting Noah to one arm while reaching into his pocket with his free hand. Was going to wait until opening day, but he pulled out a small velvet box. Beatrice's breath caught. Mike, before you say anything, he continued quickly. This isn't a proposal, not yet. That'll come when we're both ready. He opened the box, revealing a delicate silver key on a chain. This is a promise. A reminder that you'll always have a home with us, no matter what. Tears blurred Beatrice's vision as she touched the key. It was beautiful in its simplicity, clearly handcrafted, probably by the artisan who'd made some of their furniture. Turn it over, Mike urged softly. Engraved on the back were 3 words. Where life found. Because that's what happened. Isn't it? Mike's voice was rough with emotion. Life found us, brought us together in that diner, gave us Noah, led us here. Beatrice couldn't speak. Instead, she took the key and slipped it around her neck, then pulled Mike and Noah into a tight embrace. They stood like that for a long moment, their little family complete in its imperfect perfection. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Through the glass, they could see Beatrice's mother and Uncle Marcus, the latter now walking with a cane but growing stronger every day. Behind them stood Mrs. Henderson and several other neighbors, all carrying dishes and supplies. I might have mentioned we were doing the final touches today, Mike admitted sheepishly. Your mom insisted on a blessing for the space. Beatrice laughed, wiping away happy tears. Of course she did. As their friends and family filed in, bringing warmth and life to the empty cafe, Beatrice felt the rightness of everything settle into her bones. This was what she'd been looking for all along. Not just success or security, but community. Love. A sense of belonging. Noah squirmed to be put down, eager to show off his new almost walking skills to his grandmother. Mike's hand found hers as they watched their son wobble and laugh, surrounded by people who loved him. Happy? He asked quietly. Beatrice touched, the key at her throat, thinking about all the doors that had opened since that night at the diner, about how sometimes the best love stories weren't about instant passion or fairy tale endings, but about 2 people choosing each other every day. About how family could be built from scratch, with patience and trust, and a willingness to let life surprise you. More than happy, she replied, squeezing his hand. I'm home. Around them, their gathered loved ones began setting up an impromptu celebration. Someone had brought French toast from the diner where it all began. Uncle Marcus was telling stories about Beatrice as a child. Noah was the center of attention, basking in the love of his extended family. And through it all, Mike and Beatrice stood together, watching their past, present, and future merge into something beautiful, something real, something worth every risk and every fear they'd overcome to get here. Because sometimes when life finds you, the only thing to do is hold on tight and let love build the rest. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Monroe's Haven, casting warm light on the well-worn wooden floors. At a corner table, a young mother cradled her newborn while sipping a perfectly made latte. In the mother's nook, 2 toddlers, played with blocks under the watchful eyes of their parents. Behind the counter, Beatrice moved with practiced grace, her silver key necklace catching the light as she crafted drinks and arranged pastries. The cafe had become exactly what she'd dreamed, a haven, a community space, a place where families could feel at home. "Mama, look what I made!" Noah, now nearly 4, came running from the small play area, his brown curls bouncing with each step. In his hands, he held a drawing, stick figures of their family standing in front of what was clearly meant to be the cafe. "It's beautiful, baby," Beatrice smiled, taking in the careful details he'd included: Mike's tool belt, her apron, and the tiny bump she now carried beneath it. The bell above the door chimed, and Mike walked in, fresh from a job site. Noah ran to him immediately, being scooped up into a bear hug that filled the cafe with laughter. "How are my favorite people?" Mike asked, making his way to the counter. He pressed a kiss to Beatrice's temple, his hand instinctively finding her growing belly. "Your daughter's been craving those blueberry muffins again," Beatrice replied, leaning into his touch. "Just like her mama," Mike grinned, remembering how they'd perfected the recipe together during late-night baking sessions in their kitchen. The cafe had flourished over the past 3 years, becoming a cornerstone of the community. But more than that, it had become a symbol of their journey, a dream built on trust, hard work, and love. Their wedding photo hung on the wall near the entrance, Beatrice radiant in her flowing dress, Mike looking at her like she was his whole world, and Noah between them, proudly holding the rings. Uncle Marcus had officiated the ceremony in their backyard, under the same cafe lights Mike had first installed. Now watching her family together, Noah showing Mike his drawing, regular customers calling out greetings, the new life growing inside her. Beatrice touched the key that still hung around her neck. Its engraving had worn smooth from years, of gentle handling, but its meaning had only grown stronger, because this was where life had found them all those years ago. And this was where they chose to stay, building their love story one day at a time, in a cafe filled with warmth, in a home filled with laughter, in a family built by choice and strengthened by love. Noah tugged at her apron. "Mama, tell the story again, about how you and Daddy found each other." Beatrice exchanged a smile with Mike. "Well, baby," she began, "it all started one night in a diner with French toast and dreams that were just waiting to come true. And have you ever experienced a moment when what seemed like life's biggest challenge turned out to be your greatest blessing? Like Beatrice and Mike, who found their perfect love story in the most unexpected circumstance, sometimes our best chapters begin with what we think are our worst moments. Your participation in this channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time. She was hired to deliver a baby to a sterile widower, but couldn't leave after the birth. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She never thought her body would become her salvation, but desperate times call for desperate choices. Yanka Ellis adjusted her worn denim jacket as she stepped off the Greyhound bus in Napa Valley, the California sun hitting her dark skin with a warmth that felt foreign after months of traveling through colder states. Her canvas sneakers touched the pavement with the same cautious rhythm that had carried her through 27 years of life. Always ready to move, never ready to stay. The bus station smelled of diesel and stale coffee, nothing like the magnolia blossoms she remembered from Montgomery. She pulled one of her styled braids between her fingers, a nervous habit that betrayed the confidence she tried to project. The floral headscarf she'd chosen that morning, a small splash of color against her simple outfit, felt suddenly too bright, too hopeful for what lay ahead. Her phone buzzed. A text from the lawyer. "Mr. Moore will meet you at Riverside Diner on Main Street, 2 p.m. sharp." Yanka glanced at her cracked phone screen. 1:47 p.m. Just enough time to find the place and compose herself for the most unusual job interview of her life. The diner sat tucked between a vintage bookstore and a small pharmacy, its red vinyl booths visible through smudged windows. She pushed through the glass door, and a bell chimed overhead, the same sound that had followed her through countless similar establishments across the country. But this time felt different. This time she wasn't just passing through. She spotted him immediately. Cristiano Moore sat in the corner booth, his tall frame somehow making the space look smaller. Even seated, she could tell he was well over 6 feet. His grey eyes lifted from an untouched cup of coffee, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other. He wasn't what she'd expected. No expensive suit, no flashy watch. Just a man in his late 30s wearing a simple button-down shirt with sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms marked by honest work. His dark hair showed traces of silver at the temples, and his beard looked like he'd forgotten to shave for a few days. There was something deliberately unremarkable about his appearance, as if he'd chosen invisibility over impression. Miss Ellis. His voice carried no trace of California casualness, just measured formality. Mr. Moore. She slid into the booth across from him, noting how his fingers wrapped around the coffee mug without lifting it, like he needed something to hold on to. The waitress appeared, an older woman with kind eyes and sensible shoes. "What can I get you, honey?" "Just coffee, please." Yanka's Alabama accent emerged slightly thicker than usual, the way it always did when she felt uncertain. They sat in silence until the coffee arrived. Steam rose between them like a barrier neither seemed ready to cross. The lawyer explained the arrangement, Cristiano said finally, his eyes focused somewhere just past her shoulder. "But I want to make sure you understand what you're agreeing to." Yanka straightened. She'd had this conversation with herself 100 times during the 3-day bus ride. 9 months. Your baby, $50,000. Her voice stayed steady. Professional. "I understand perfectly." Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or disappointment. "It's not that simple." "It is for me." She took a sip of coffee, grateful for something to do with her hands. "I've done my research, Mr. Moore. I know the risks, the legal aspects, the medical requirements. This isn't my first rodeo with difficult decisions." He leaned back slightly, studying her with those unsettling grey eyes. Why? The question hung between them, more personal than anything they'd discussed through lawyers and paperwork. Yanka felt the familiar urge to deflect, to give him the sanitized version she'd prepared. Instead, she found herself being honest. "Because I'm tired of just surviving." The words came out quieter than she'd intended. "And because sometimes helping someone else get what they want is the only way to get what you need." Cristiano's hand moved to his jaw, fingers tracing the line of his beard, a gesture that seemed unconscious, vulnerable. "There's something else," he said, and the tone of his voice made her pulse quicken. "Something the lawyers didn't tell you." And in that moment, Yanka realized this arrangement was about to become far more complicated than any contract could contain. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest touch. Yanka's coffee cup trembled almost imperceptibly in her hands as she waited for Cristiano to continue. The diner's afternoon crowd buzzed around them, truckers ordering pie, a young mother wiping her toddler's face, an elderly couple sharing a basket of fries, but their corner booth felt isolated from the world. "The pregnancy will be high risk," Cristiano said finally, his grey eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her want to look away. "Not because of anything wrong with you, but because of my genetic history. My son—" He paused, his jaw working silently before he found the words. "My son was born with complications that made his first months difficult." Yanka set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "What kind of complications?" "Heart defects. Respiratory issues. He spent more time in the NICU than at home." Cristiano's voice remained steady, but she noticed how his knuckles whitened as he gripped his mug. "The doctors said it was genetic, rare, but possible to pass on." The waitress refilled their cups without being asked, her practiced movements a welcome distraction from the weight settling between them. Yanka watched the steam rise from her fresh coffee, buying herself time to process what she'd just heard. "So you're telling me," she said slowly, "that I could be carrying a baby who might not make it, or who might be perfectly healthy?" Cristiano leaned forward slightly, and for the first time since she'd sat down, his composure cracked just enough to reveal something raw underneath. "The chances are about 30% that there could be issues. 70% that everything would be normal." Yanka felt that familiar flutter in her chest, the same feeling she'd had at 19 when the police officer told her about her parents' accident, or at 23 when her last landlord gave her 3 days to pack, the feeling of the ground shifting beneath her feet. "And you didn't think to mention this before I traveled 2,000 miles. I wanted to tell you in person." His voice dropped lower, more private. "This isn't just a business transaction for me, Miss Ellis. If something goes wrong—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Yanka could hear the ending in the silence that followed. She studied his face, the lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, the careful way he held himself as if bracing for impact. "You lost them," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Cristiano's hand moved to his jaw again, that unconscious gesture she was beginning to recognize. "I had a car accident when my son was 2. My wife was driving to pick up his medication." The words came out measured, like he'd practiced saying them without falling apart. They were my whole world. The confession hung between them, heavy and honest. Yanka understood now why he'd sought out this arrangement, why he was willing to pay $50,000 to a stranger. It wasn't about wanting a child, it was about needing to fill a void that had swallowed everything else. She thought about the bus ticket in her backpack, about the $300 left in her worn wallet, about the endless succession of small towns and temporary jobs that had defined her adult life. She thought about her parents, gone 8 years now, and how desperately she'd wanted to build something permanent from the ashes of her loss. 70% odds, she repeated, more to herself than to him. "I understand if you want to walk away." Cristiano reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I brought enough cash to cover your bus fare back, plus extra for your time." Yanka stared at the envelope, then at his face. In his grey eyes she saw something she recognized, the particular kind of hope that came after too much grief, fragile and fierce at the same time. She made her decision before she could second-guess herself. "I'll need to meet the doctor first. I want to understand exactly what we're dealing with." She pushed the envelope back across the table. "And I'll need everything in writing, every detail, every risk, every contingency." Something shifted in Cristiano's expression, surprise, maybe, or relief. "Dr. Santos is the best high-risk specialist in Northern California," he said. "She handled my wife's pregnancy. She'll tell you everything you need to know." Yanka nodded, feeling the familiar sensation of stepping off a cliff into uncertain air. But this time, for the first time in years, she wasn't jumping alone. Outside the diner window, the California sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of promise and warning, and neither of them knew that this conversation had just set in motion something that would change both their lives forever. Dr. Elena Maria Santos had the kind of hands that made patients feel safe before she even spoke a word. Yanka noticed them first, steady, graceful fingers that moved with practiced confidence as she flipped through the medical charts. The doctor's office smelled of lavender and antiseptic, a combination that somehow managed to be both clinical and comforting. Diplomas lined the walls alongside family photos, showing a woman who clearly understood the value of both professional excellence and personal warmth. "Please, sit." Dr. Santos gestured to the chairs across from her mahogany desk, her voice carrying the slight musical accent of her Mexican heritage. At 44, she wore her authority lightly, dressed in earth-toned blouses that softened the sterile environment of the medical center. Yanka settled into the chair, hyper-aware of Cristiano's presence beside her. He sat with the same controlled posture she'd observed at the diner, but she caught him glancing at her when he thought she wasn't looking, quick, assessing glances that felt less like scrutiny and more like concern. "Mr. Moore has explained the situation," Dr. Santos began, her dark eyes moving between them with the kind of perceptive attention that missed nothing. "But I want to hear from you, Yanka. What questions do you have?" The use of her first name felt deliberately intimate, a small bridge across the professional distance. Yanka pulled gently at one of her braids, gathering her thoughts. "I need to know what high risk really means. Not the medical terminology, the truth about what I might be facing." Dr. Santos leaned back in her chair, a gesture that somehow made the room feel less formal. "I appreciate directness. It makes my job easier." She opened the top file on her desk. "Cristiano's genetic history indicates a 30% chance of cardiac and respiratory complications. If they occur, they typically manifest in the second trimester. And if they do manifest," Yanka's voice stayed steady, but she felt Cristiano tense beside her. "Bed rest, frequent monitoring, possible hospitalization for the final months." "Doctor." Santos's tone remained matter-of-fact, but her eyes carried genuine warmth. "The baby would likely be born premature and require extended NICU care, but Yanka," she leaned forward slightly, 70% of pregnancies with this genetic marker result in completely healthy babies. Yanka absorbed this information, filing away each detail. "What about me?" What are the risks to my health? Higher blood pressure, increased chance of gestational diabetes, possible complications during delivery, all manageable with proper care. Dr. Santos's fingers drummed once against the desk. But there's something else we need to discuss. The room seemed to hold its breath. If complications do arise, if this becomes a high-maintenance pregnancy requiring extended bed rest and hospitalization, you'll need someone to advocate for you. Someone who understands your medical history, your preferences, your fears. She looked directly at Cristiano. The traditional surrogacy arrangement assumes distance between parties. This situation might require closeness. Janka felt heat rise in her cheeks. What kind of closeness? Living arrangements that allow for immediate medical response. 24-hour accessibility to both you and emergency care. In my experience with similar cases, Dr. Santos paused, choosing her words carefully. The most successful outcomes happen when the support system is consistent and present. Cristiano cleared his throat. I have a guest house on my property. It's private, comfortable, close enough for medical emergencies, far enough for personal space. The offer hung in the air like a question neither of them had expected to face so soon. Janka imagined herself in some remote guest house, dependent on a man she'd known for exactly one day, carrying a child who might or might not survive. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course. Dr. Santos reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a business card. But Janka, I want you to know something. I've been handling high-risk pregnancies for 15 years. I've seen arrangements like this work beautifully when both parties are committed to the process, and I've seen them fail when people try to maintain too much distance. She stood up, signaling the end of the consultation. The choice is yours, but if you decide to move forward, we'll need to begin prenatal vitamins and monitoring within the week. Outside the medical center, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. Janka and Cristiano walked to his truck, an older Ford F-150 that looked well-maintained but unpretentious, exactly what she was beginning to expect from him. The guest house, she said, as they reached the vehicle. What's it like? Cristiano's hand paused on the door handle. One bedroom, small kitchen, bathroom with a garden tub, windows facing the vineyard. It's quiet. After 8 years of bus stations, highway motels and shared apartments with strangers, quiet sounded like a foreign concept. Can I see it? The words came out before she could stop them. He nodded, and something in his expression shifted. A wall coming down, or maybe a door opening just a crack. As they drove toward his property, Janka stared out the window at the rolling hills of Napa Valley and wondered if she was about to make the smartest decision of her life, or the most dangerous one she'd ever risked. The vineyard stretched out like a green ocean under the golden hour light, and Janka felt something inside her chest loosen for the first time in months. Cristiano's property was nothing like she'd imagined. No ostentatious mansion or manicured gardens screaming wealth. Instead, she saw weathered wooden fences, gravel pathways worn smooth by years of use, and a main house that looked like it had grown organically from the landscape itself. The guest house sat about 50 yards away, a small, cottage-like structure with white-painted wood siding and a wraparound porch that begged for a rocking chair. It's not much, Cristiano said, as he cut the truck's engine, but his voice carried a note of pride he was trying to hide. Janka stepped out of the cab, her sneakers crunching on the gravel. The air smelled different here, clean with hints of earth and growing things that reminded her vaguely of her grandmother's backyard in Montgomery, a place where she'd felt safe once upon a time. It's perfect, she said, and meant it. The guest house key turned easily in the lock, and the front door opened to reveal exactly what Cristiano had promised. One bedroom, small kitchen, bathroom with a garden tub. But he'd undersold the charm. Hardwood floors worn to a warm honey color, windows that let in streams of late afternoon light, and a kitchen table just big enough for 2 people who might want to share a quiet meal. The previous owners built it for their daughter when she got married, Cristiano explained, lingering in the doorway, as if uncertain whether he should follow her inside. She wanted to stay close to family, but have her own space. Janka ran her fingers along the kitchen counter. Real wood, not laminate. In the bedroom, she found a queen-sized bed with a quilt that looked handmade and windows that framed the vineyard like living paintings. How long since anyone lived here? She asked. 3 years. He paused. Since before my wife and son died. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. This wasn't just a guest house, It was a place where he'd once imagined hosting family, friends, celebrations. Now it sat empty, another casualty of his grief. Janka turned to face him. "Why are you doing this?" "Really?" Cristiano looked out the bedroom window toward the vineyard, his jaw working silently before he answered, "Because I'm tired of everything here being about loss." His voice came out rougher than usual. "I want something to grow again." The honesty in his words hit her unexpectedly hard. She thought about the bus ticket in her backpack, about the motel room she'd paid for in town, about the countless temporary places she'd called home over the past 8 years. "I have conditions," she said finally. "Name them. I keep my own schedule, my own routines. If I want to take the bus to town for groceries or just to think, I do it without checking in." She counted off on her fingers. No hovering, no treating me like I'm made of glass, and no assumptions about what this arrangement means beyond the contract. Cristiano nodded. "Anything else? If this gets complicated, if you start looking at me like I'm her replacement, or if I start feeling like a prisoner in paradise, we call it off. No questions, no guilt trips." "Fair enough." He pulled a set of keys from his pocket and held them out. "House key, spare truck key in case of emergencies, and—" He hesitated. "The main house key, just in case." Their fingers brushed as she took the keys, and for a moment neither of them moved. The touch was brief, accidental, but it sent a jolt of awareness through her that had nothing to do with their business arrangement. "I'll need a few days to think it over," she said, stepping back. "Of course." But something in his expression suggested he already knew what her answer would be. As the sun began to set, they stood on the guest house porch, the vineyard spread out before them like a promise. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and the sound carried across the fields with rural ease. "What's that?" Janka pointed to a small building near the main house. "Old wine cellar. I converted it into a workshop." Cristiano's hands found his pockets. "I restore furniture in my spare time. Keeps my hands busy." She could picture him there, sleeves rolled up, focused on bringing something broken back to life. The image felt unexpectedly intimate, like she was glimpsing something private. "I should get back to town," she said, though something in her was reluctant to leave. "I'll drive you." "I can walk. It's only a couple miles." "Not in the dark." His tone brooked no argument. "Besides, I need to pick up groceries anyway." As they drove back toward town, the silence between them felt different, less guarded, more thoughtful. When they reached the motel, Cristiano parked but didn't turn off the engine. "Janka," he said as she reached for the door handle. She turned back to him. "Whatever you decide, I want you to know, this isn't about replacing what I lost. It's about building something new." She studied his face in the dashboard light, seeing something there she hadn't noticed before. Vulnerability wrapped in determination. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said. But as she walked toward her motel room, Janka already knew that tomorrow would bring a decision that would change everything. Because for the first time in 8 years, she'd found a place that felt like it might become home. 3 days later, Janka stood in the guest house doorway with everything she owned fitting into 2 duffel bags and a worn backpack. It wasn't much. Clothes that had survived countless laundromats, a few books with dog-eared pages, the small sewing kit her mother had given her, and a mason jar filled with buttons she'd collected from every city she'd passed through. 8 years of nomadic life distilled into what she could carry. "That's it?" Cristiano asked, setting down the bags he'd insisted on carrying from his truck. "I travel light." She tried to keep her voice casual, but something about the way he looked at her meager possessions made her feel exposed. "Less to lose that way." He nodded slowly, understanding flickering in his grey eyes. "I put some basics in the kitchen. Coffee, bread, eggs. There's a grocery store in town, but if you need anything specific, I can take care of myself." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, a defensive reflex honed by years of independence. "I know you can." His response was gentle, without judgment. "I just meant, you don't have to." The distinction hit her unexpectedly. There was a difference between being able to take care of yourself and having to do it alone. She wasn't sure she remembered how to navigate that difference. "Dr. Santos wants to see me next week," she said, changing the subject. "Start the monitoring." "I'll drive you." "I can." "Janka," he said her name quietly, and something in his tone made her look at him. "Let me help. It's what I'm here for." She wanted to argue, to maintain the walls that had kept her safe for so long. Instead, she found herself nodding. After Cristiano left, she unpacked in silence, placing her few belongings in drawers that felt cavernous compared to the motel rooms and shared spaces she was used to. The closet could hold 10 times her wardrobe. The bathroom had counter space for toiletries she didn't own. That evening, as she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and one of her books, a soft knock interrupted the quiet. Through the window, she could see Cristiano on the porch, holding a plate covered with a kitchen towel. "I made too much dinner," he said when she opened the door. "Thought you might be hungry." The plate held perfectly grilled chicken, roasted vegetables that looked like they'd come from his own garden, and rice with herbs she couldn't identify. It smelled like comfort, like the kind of meal someone makes when they actually care about nourishment, rather than just filling an empty stomach. "You didn't have to—" "I know." He handed her the plate, their fingers brushing again. This time, neither of them pulled away immediately. "But I wanted to." After he left, Janka ate slowly, savoring each bite. The vegetables were sweet and tender, the chicken seasoned with something that reminded her of her grandmother's Sunday dinners. When she finished, she found herself staring at the empty plate, wondering when was the last time someone had cooked for her just because they wanted to take care of her. The next morning, she woke to find a thermos of coffee on the porch steps, still warm, with a note, "In case you like it stronger than what's in the kitchen." The coffee was perfect, dark and rich, exactly how she preferred it. He'd been paying attention during their brief conversations, filing away details she hadn't even realized she'd shared. That afternoon, she ventured to the main house to return the dinner plate. Through the kitchen window, she could see Cristiano at the stove, sleeves rolled up, moving with the easy confidence of someone who actually enjoyed cooking. He looked different here, less guarded, more himself. "Thank you for dinner," she said when he answered her knock. "There's leftover lasagna if you want some." He gestured toward the kitchen. "I'm not good at cooking for one person anymore." The admission was quietly devastating. She could picture him in this kitchen with his wife, probably laughing while they prepared meals together, maybe with their son in a high chair making a mess with his food. Now he cooked elaborate meals for no one, muscle memory of a life that no longer existed. "I could help," she found herself saying. "With the cooking, I mean, if you want." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe gratitude. "You don't have to." "I know," she echoed his words from the night before, "but I want to." That evening, they cooked together in comfortable silence. Janka chopped vegetables while Cristiano seasoned the meat, their movements gradually synchronizing as they shared the small kitchen space. When her hand reached for the salt at the same time as his, when he stepped behind her to reach the upper cabinet, when she passed him ingredients without being asked, each small interaction felt like a dance they were learning together. "You're good at this," he said, watching her julienne carrots with practiced precision. "My grandmother taught me. Said a woman should know how to feed herself and the people she loves." The words slipped out before she could catch them, carrying more weight than she'd intended. "She sounds wise." She was. Janka focused on the carrots, not trusting herself to look at him. "She died when I was 16. Cancer. I'm sorry." The simple words carried genuine sympathy, not the empty platitudes she was used to hearing. He understood loss, understood the way it carved holes in your life that never quite filled in. As they sat down to eat, Janka realized this was the first time in years she'd shared a meal that felt like more than just consuming calories. The food tasted better when eaten across from someone who noticed whether you preferred your vegetables crisp or tender, who refilled your water glass without being asked, who seemed genuinely interested in the small stories you found yourself telling between bites. "This is nice," she said softly, then immediately regretted the admission. "It is," Cristiano agreed, his voice equally quiet. Outside the kitchen window, the vineyard stretched into darkness, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the evening sounds of the countryside, crickets, the rustle of wind through grapevines, the settled breathing of land at rest. For the first time since her parents died, Janka felt something that might have been peace, but peace, she'd learned, was the most dangerous emotion of all, because it made you want to stay. 2 weeks into the pregnancy, Janka woke up at 3 in the morning with her heart racing and her hands trembling. The nausea had started gradually, a queasy feeling that crept in during the afternoon, making her push away half-finished meals. But this was different. This felt like her body was staging a revolution, and she was losing the war. She stumbled to the bathroom, gripping the cool porcelain of the sink, as waves of dizziness washed over her. In the mirror, her reflection looked pale against her dark skin, and the braids she'd been too tired to properly wrap the night before fell in loose tendrils around her face. "Come on," she whispered to herself, the Alabama accent thicker in her exhaustion. You've handled worse than this. But as another wave of nausea hit, she wasn't so sure. A soft knock on the guesthouse door made her freeze. Through the window, she could see Cristiano's silhouette on the porch, and she realized she'd left the bathroom light on, a beacon in the pre-dawn darkness that had probably woken him. "Janka, are you okay?" She wanted to call out that she was fine, that he should go back to bed, that she didn't need anyone hovering over her. Instead, she found herself opening the door, grateful for the cool night air on her clammy skin. "I'm fine," she said automatically, but the words came out shaky. Cristiano took one look at her and stepped inside without asking permission. "You're not fine. When did this start?" "Few days ago." She sank into one of the kitchen chairs, suddenly too tired to maintain her usual walls. "It's just morning sickness, normal pregnancy stuff." "At 3 in the morning?" She managed a weak smile. "The baby doesn't know how to tell time yet." But Cristiano didn't smile back. He was studying her with the same intense focus she'd seen in Dr. Santos's office, cataloguing details with the precision of someone who'd learned to watch for warning signs. "Have you been eating?" he asked. "Some." The truth was, everything had started tasting wrong. Even her morning coffee, the one bright spot in her daily routine, now made her stomach revolt. Without a word, Cristiano moved to her kitchen, opening cabinets with the easy familiarity of someone who'd stocked them himself. He pulled out crackers, ginger tea, and honey, moving with quiet efficiency as he prepared something that smelled soothing rather than overwhelming. "My wife had terrible morning sickness," he said, his back to her as he worked. "Dr. Santos said ginger tea and small, frequent meals. Nothing too strong, nothing too sweet." Janka watched his hands as he prepared the tea. Steady, careful, practiced. "Did it help?" "Sometimes." He turned to face her, and for a moment, the careful distance he usually maintained slipped away. She used to joke that the baby was already making demands like a typical Moor. The past tense hung between them like a bridge neither of them had expected to cross. Janka found herself wanting to ask more about his wife, about the pregnancy, about what it felt like to lose everything you'd built your life around. Instead, she accepted the mug of tea he offered, inhaling the gentle steam. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You don't have to thank me for taking care of you." The words came out more intense than he'd probably intended, and she saw him catch himself, stepping back both physically and emotionally. "I mean, it's part of the arrangement." But they both knew it wasn't just about the arrangement anymore. The tea helped, warm and settling in her stomach. As the nausea receded, Janka became aware of other things, how Cristiano had thrown on jeans and a t-shirt over what were obviously sleep clothes, how his hair stuck up on one side, how he kept glancing at her with barely concealed worry. "You didn't have to get up," she said. "I could have handled this alone." "I know you could have." He sat down across from her at the small table. "But you don't have to anymore." There was that phrase again, the distinction between could and had to. It was becoming a theme between them, this careful negotiation of independence and care. "The light woke you up?" "No." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I don't sleep much anyway. I was reading in the kitchen when I saw your light come on." Insomnia. Another casualty of grief, she supposed. She imagined him sitting alone in his kitchen at 3 in the morning, probably drinking coffee that was too strong and reading books that couldn't quite distract him from the quiet of a house meant for a family. "What do you read?" she asked. The question seemed to surprise him. Mostly non-fiction, farming journals, winemaking techniques, sometimes biography. He paused. "What about you?" "Fiction, usually. Romance novels, mostly." She felt heat rise in her cheeks at the admission. People always act like they're trash, but they're not. They're about hope, about believing that two broken people can fix each other. Something flickered across his face. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. "I don't think they're trash," he said quietly. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten at the edges, dawn creeping across the vineyard in shades of purple and gold. Janka realized they'd been sitting here for nearly an hour, talking in the soft voices of people who'd found themselves unexpectedly comfortable with each other. "I should let you get some sleep," Cristiano said, standing. "Will you?" she asked. "Sleep, I mean." He paused at the door, one hand on the frame. "Probably not. But that's not your problem to solve." "Maybe not," she said. "But I'm awake too if you want company." The offer hung between them, more intimate than either of them had intended. Cristiano looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him weighing the wisdom of accepting against the loneliness of declining. "I make good coffee," he said finally. "Even if you can't drink it right now, I'll stick with the tea." But I'd like the company. As they walked together toward the main house in the early morning light, Janka realized something had shifted between them. The careful boundaries they'd established were beginning to blur, replaced by something more honest and infinitely more dangerous. Because caring for someone, really caring, was the first step toward loving them, and love had never been part of their contract. Your blood pressure is elevated, and you've lost 3 pounds since last week. Dr. Santos's words hung in the examination room like a diagnosis neither Janka nor Cristiano wanted to hear. The ultrasound machine hummed softly in the corner, and Janka could still feel the cool gel on her belly from the scan that had shown their baby, healthy, active, and completely unaware of the complications brewing around it. What does that mean? Janka asked, adjusting the paper gown that never seemed to cover enough. It means we need to take this more seriously. Dr. Santos pulled her chair closer, her earth-toned cardigan a calming presence in the sterile room. The nausea, the weight loss, the elevated blood pressure, these aren't just normal pregnancy symptoms. Your body is struggling with the hormonal changes. Cristiano leaned forward in his chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. What can we do? Bed rest. Modified, not complete, yet. But I want Janka to limit her activities, stay hydrated, and eat small meals every 2 hours whether she feels like it or not. Dr. Santos's dark eyes moved between them with the perceptive attention Janka was beginning to recognize. She'll need someone to monitor her, make sure she's following the restrictions. I can take care of myself, Janka said automatically, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew they sounded hollow. The past few days had been a struggle, dizziness when she stood too quickly, exhaustion that seemed to seep into her bones, nausea that made even water taste wrong. I know you can, Dr. Santos said gently. Joyce, but right now, taking care of yourself means accepting help. This isn't about weakness, Janka. This is about giving your baby the best chance. The word baby still felt strange on her tongue, still carried the clinical distance of fetus or pregnancy. But when Dr. Santos said it with warmth and certainty, it became something real, something that deserved protection. What about work? Janka asked. She'd been doing some freelance bookkeeping online, small jobs that helped her feel productive and independent. Light computer work is fine, but no stress, no deadlines that keep you up at night. Dr. Santos made notes in her chart. And I want to see you weekly now instead of bi-weekly. Outside the medical center, Cristiano was unusually quiet as they walked to his truck. The late morning sun felt too bright, too cheerful for the weight of what they'd just heard. You're worried, Janka said as they drove through downtown Napa. Aren't you? She was, but admitting it felt like giving up some essential part of herself, the part that had survived 8 years of uncertainty by refusing to depend on anyone else's strength. I'll be fine, she said. I just need to adjust my routine. Cristiano pulled into a pharmacy parking lot and turned off the engine. Janka, look at me. When she met his grey eyes, she saw something there that made her chest tighten. Not pity, but genuine concern, mixed with something deeper, more personal. You don't have to pretend this isn't scary, he said quietly. I'm scared too. The admission hit her unexpectedly hard. She'd been so focused on maintaining her own walls that she hadn't considered how this might be affecting him. Watching another pregnancy carry the same risks that had once threatened his wife and child. I keep thinking about what Dr. Santos said, she found herself saying, about accepting help. I don't know how to do that anymore. Maybe that's something we can figure out together. The word together hung between them, carrying more weight than a simple arrangement between strangers. They sat in the parking lot, watching people go about their ordinary lives, and Janka realized that somewhere in the past month, this had stopped being ordinary for either of them. That afternoon, Cristiano appeared at the guest house with bags of groceries and a determined expression. What's all this? Janka asked, watching him unload items onto her kitchen counter. Dr. Santos gave me a list. He held up a piece of paper covered in his careful handwriting. Try foods that might help with the nausea, things that are easy to digest, supplements you need to take. She watched him organize everything with methodical precision, crackers in one cabinet, herbal teas in another, fruits and vegetables that looked like they'd been chosen with scientific care. You don't have to... Janka. He turned to face her, and she saw that familiar gesture as his hand moved to his jaw. Let me do this. Please. There was something in his voice. Not quite desperation, but close to it. She realized this wasn't just about taking care of her. This was about him needing to feel useful, needed, protective. This was about him trying to save someone he couldn't save before. Okay, she said quietly. Relief flickered across his face. I can cook for both of us, bring meals over, or you could eat at the main house. Whatever feels comfortable. The main house, she heard herself say. If that's okay, it feels less like charity that way. Something warm crossed his expression. It's not charity, it's... He paused, searching for the right word. It's taking care of family. The word family settled between them like a question neither of them was ready to answer. But that evening, as Janka sat at Cristiano's kitchen table eating soup that tasted like comfort and watching him move around the kitchen with quiet efficiency, it didn't feel like pretending. It felt like something she'd been missing without knowing it. The baby moved today, she said suddenly, her hand moving unconsciously to her still flat stomach. During the ultrasound, Dr. Santos said it was a good sign. Cristiano paused in his dishwashing, his shoulders tensing slightly. Could you feel it? Not yet, but I could see it on the screen. Just a little flutter. She looked down at her hands, made it seem more real somehow. When he turned to face her, his eyes held a mixture of joy and pain that made her heart ache for him. That's good, he said softly. Jas, that's really good. Later, as she walked back to the guest house under a sky full of stars, Janka realized that for the first time since her parents died, she wasn't just surviving. She was hoping, and hope, she was beginning to understand, was the most dangerous thing of all. The nightmares always came at 2:30 in the morning. Janka had been living at the guest house for 6 weeks now, and she'd learned to recognize the sounds from the main house. The sudden silence, where there should have been the gentle rhythm of sleep, followed by footsteps pacing across hardwood floors. Then the soft closing of a door as Cristiano stepped onto his porch. Tonight, as she lay in bed feeling the baby's first tentative movements like butterfly wings against her ribs, she heard it again, the restless walking, the weight of grief moving through rooms that had once held laughter. She should stay in bed, mind her own business, respect the boundaries they'd carefully maintained, even as those boundaries grew thinner each day. Instead, she found herself pulling on her robe and walking across the dewy grass toward the main house. Cristiano sat on his porch steps, elbows on his knees, staring out at the vineyard. He'd thrown on jeans and a t-shirt, but his feet were bare, and his hair stuck up on one side like he'd been running his hands through it. In the moonlight, he looked younger and more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. You're supposed to be resting, he said without looking up, as if he'd sensed her approach. So are you. She settled beside him on the step, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body, but not quite touching. Is I a bad dream? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, car accident. Always the same one. I see it happening, but I can't stop it. Janka pulled her robe tighter around herself, feeling the night air carry the scent of grapevines and earth. Do you want to talk about it? Not particularly, but he didn't get up and go inside, didn't shut down the conversation the way she expected. What about you? Why are you awake? Baby's moving more at night. It's strange, like having a secret only I know about. She placed her hand on her stomach, where a gentle flutter responded to her touch. Sometimes I forget this is temporary, that in a few months I'll hand this baby over and go back to my regular life. Will you? The question came out quiet, almost hesitant. That's the arrangement. I know what the arrangement says. Cristiano turned to look at her, and in the moonlight, his grey eyes seemed almost silver. But what do you want? The question hung between them like a bridge she wasn't sure she was brave enough to cross. What did she want? For 8 years, wanting had been a luxury she couldn't afford. Wanting meant hoping, and hoping meant disappointment, and disappointment meant the kind of pain that could knock you flat for months. I don't know, she said honestly. I've spent so long not letting myself want things that I've forgotten how. I remember what that's like. His voice carried the weight of experience. After the accident, I stopped wanting anything except for the pain to stop. It was safer that way. What changed? He looked out at the vineyard, where moonlight painted the grapevines silver. You did. This did. He gestured vaguely toward her stomach. Suddenly, I was invested in something again, and it terrified me. The admission hit her like a physical blow, not because it was unexpected, but because it voiced something she'd been feeling but couldn't name. This growing sense that what was happening between them was bigger than a business arrangement, more complicated than simple proximity. Cristiano, she started, then stopped, not sure how to finish. I know, he said quietly. I know this wasn't supposed to happen. I know we agreed to keep things professional, but somewhere along the way, professional became personal, and personal became dangerous, she finished. Yeah. They sat in silence, the weight of unspoken feelings settling around them like fog. In the distance, an owl called, and somewhere in the vineyard, small creatures rustled through the leaves, carrying on with their lives, while two humans tried to figure out how theirs had become so tangled together. "I think about you all the time," Cristiano said suddenly, the words rushing out like he'd been holding them back for weeks. "How you pull on your braids when you're thinking, how you hum while you cook, how you get that line between your eyebrows when you're trying not to let me see that you need help." Janka felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Cristiano, I think about what it would be like if this were real, if you were staying because you wanted to, not because Dr. Santos said you had to. If this baby were ours, not just mine." The word ours hung in the air between them, carrying all the weight of possibilities they'd both been trying not to acknowledge. "But it's not real," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "and wanting it to be real is just going to hurt both of us. I know that." He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his expression made her breath catch. "But I can't seem to stop myself from wanting it anyway." Without thinking, she reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers in a gesture that felt both natural and earth-shattering. His skin was warm, calloused from work, and she could feel his pulse beating against her thumb. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I've been alone for so long that I don't know how to be part of something. And this baby, what happens when the baby comes? What happens to us? I don't know." He squeezed her hand gently. "But maybe we don't have to figure it all out tonight." "Maybe not," she agreed. They sat holding hands in the moonlight, two people who'd found each other in the space between grief and hope, contract and connection. The baby moved again, a stronger flutter this time, and Janka gasped softly. "What?" Cristiano asked, concern immediately replacing the softness in his voice. "The baby, it's here." She guided his free hand to her stomach, pressing his palm against the spot where she'd felt the movement. They waited, barely breathing, and then it happened again, a gentle push against his hand, like the baby was saying hello. Cristiano's eyes filled with tears. He tried to blink away. That's incredible." "The first time you've felt it move," Janka said softly. "The first time anyone has," he corrected. "You're the only one who's been there for all of this." The weight of that truth settled between them. She was the one who'd been there for the morning sickness, the doctor's appointments, the midnight worries. She was the one carrying this piece of his heart, literally and figuratively. "I should go back to bed," she said, but neither of them moved, probably. But his hand stayed on her stomach, and hers stayed in his. "Now this is going to complicate everything," she whispered. "Everything's already complicated," he said, "but maybe that's not such a bad thing." As they finally stood to go their separate ways, Janka realized that tonight had changed something fundamental between them. They'd crossed a line they couldn't uncross, acknowledged feelings they couldn't take back. And as she walked back to the guest house with the memory of his hand on her stomach and the warmth of his confession still echoing in her ears, she knew that whatever happened next, she was no longer just carrying his baby, she was carrying his heart. And somehow he'd ended up with hers. The contractions started at 4 in the morning, sharp and unmistakable, 12 weeks before they were supposed to. Janka woke with a gasp that turned into a cry of pain, her hands instinctively moving to her 28-week belly as her body cramped with frightening intensity. This wasn't the gentle Braxton Hicks contractions Dr. Santos had warned her about. This was something else entirely. "No, no, no," she whispered to the empty guest house, panic rising in her throat as another contraction gripped her. "Not yet. Please, not yet." Through the haze of pain and fear, she managed to reach for her phone, fingers shaking as she scrolled to Cristiano's number. The phone rang once before his voice answered, instantly alert despite the early hour. "Janka, what's wrong?" "Something's happening," she managed between contractions. "The baby, I think—" She didn't need to finish. Through the window, she could see lights flicking on in the main house, and within minutes, Cristiano was at her door, still pulling on a shirt over his jeans, his hair disheveled, but his eyes sharp with focus. "How far apart?" he asked, moving to her side with the calm efficiency of someone who'd been through this before. "Every 3 minutes," she gasped. "Cristiano, it's too early. The baby can't come now. We're going to the hospital." His voice stayed steady, but she could see the fear in his grey eyes, the memory of another emergency that had ended in loss. "Can you walk?" The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of pain and sirens. Cristiano had called 911, and the paramedics met them halfway. transferring Janka to the ambulance while he followed behind. She kept her eyes fixed on his truck in the side mirror, drawing strength from his presence even as terror threatened to overwhelm her. "We need to stop this," she heard Dr. Santos saying as they wheeled her into the emergency room. "Get her on magnesium sulfate, start an IV, and call the NICU team." The next hours passed in a haze of medical procedures and mounting fear. Janka found herself in a hospital bed, connected to monitors that beeped with the baby's heartbeat, strong but too fast, distressed by whatever was happening in her body. "The medication is helping," Dr. Santos explained, her usually calm demeanor showing cracks of concern. "We've slowed the contractions, but not stopped them completely. You're not dilating, which is good, but the baby is showing signs of stress." "What does that mean?" Cristiano asked from the chair beside her bed. He'd been there since they arrived, holding her hand through each contraction, his presence the only thing keeping her anchored to hope. "It means we wait, and we watch, very carefully." Dr. Santos checked the monitors again. "Janka, you're going to be here for a while. Strict bed rest, constant monitoring. If the contractions stop and stay stopped for 48 hours, we can consider sending you home. But if they continue," she didn't need to finish. "If they continued, the baby would come too early, too small, too fragile, just like Cristiano's son had." "I want to stay," Cristiano said suddenly, his voice rough with emotion. "Not just during visiting hours. I want to be here." Dr. Santos looked between them with her perceptive eyes, seeing something that went deeper than their original arrangement. "Are you the father?" The question hung in the room like a challenge. Legally, biologically, yes, Cristiano was the father. But the way Dr. Santos asked it, the way she looked at them holding hands with Janka's head on his shoulder, suggested she was asking about something more fundamental. "Yes," Cristiano said simply. "So then you can stay." As evening fell, Janka lay in the hospital bed watching the monitors trace her baby's heartbeat in green lines across the screen. The contractions had slowed but not stopped, a constant reminder that everything she'd begun to hope for hung in the balance. "You should go home," she told Cristiano, though the thought of being alone made her chest tighten with panic. "Get some real sleep. I'm not leaving." His voice carried a finality that brooked no argument. "I already lost one family in a hospital. I'm not losing another." The word, family, hit her like a physical blow, not because it was unexpected, but because of how desperately she wanted it to be true. "Cristiano?" she started, but he shook his head. "No, let me say this. I know what our arrangement was supposed to be. I know you were supposed to carry this baby and then walk away, but that's not what this is anymore, and we both know it." He leaned forward, his grey eyes intense in the harsh hospital lighting. "I'm in love with you, Janka. Not just grateful, not just attracted to you, but completely, terrifyingly in love with you." Tears she'd been holding back for hours finally spilled over. "You can't say that. Not now. Not like this. What if the baby is going to be fine," he said fiercely. "And when it is, when we get through this, I want you to know that I don't want you to leave. I want you to stay, not because of the baby, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore." "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to be someone's family. What if I mess it up? What if I run when things get hard? Then I'll come find you," he said simply. "And I'll keep finding you until you believe that you're not alone anymore." The monitors around them continued their electronic symphony, but all Janka could hear was the sound of her own heart breaking open. Not with loss, but with the terrifying possibility of love. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling both natural and revolutionary. "I've been trying not to, but I do. I love you and I love this baby, and I'm scared that wanting something this much means I'm going to lose it." Cristiano moved from his chair to sit on the edge of her bed, careful not to disturb the wires and monitors. "You're not going to lose us," he said, brushing tears from her cheeks with gentle fingers. "We're going to get through this together. Promise me," she said, gripping his hand. "Promise me that if something happens to the baby, it won't change this. That you won't look at me and see failure." "I promise," he said without hesitation. "And I need you to promise me something too." "What?" "Promise me you'll stop running. Promise me you'll stay and fight for this, for us, even when it gets scary." Outside the hospital window, dawn was breaking over Napa Valley, painting the sky in shades of hope and promise. Somewhere in the distance, life was going on, people waking up, making coffee, starting their ordinary days. But here, in this room filled with monitors and medical equipment, and the weight of everything they'd finally admitted. Nothing would ever be ordinary again. "I promise," Janka whispered, and as Cristiano leaned down to kiss her forehead, as the baby's heartbeat continued its steady rhythm on the monitor, she realized that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was exactly what your heart needed most. Sometimes you had to stop running and start believing that you deserved to be caught. 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning that felt like any other but would change everything, Janka's water broke while she was folding baby clothes. She'd been on modified bed rest since the hospital scare, spending her days in the main house where Cristiano could keep an eye on her. The guest house had become storage for baby supplies, a crib they'd assembled together, tiny clothes in soft colors, blankets that smelled like hope and possibility. "Cristiano," she called calmly from the living room, where she stood in a puddle of amniotic fluid, holding an impossibly small yellow onesie. "It's time." He appeared in the doorway, dish towel still in his hands, and took in the scene with the practiced calm that had gotten them through 6 weeks of uncertainty. "How do you feel?" he asked, already reaching for the hospital bag they'd kept packed by the door. "Ready?" she said, and meant it. After weeks of fear and waiting, after midnight conversations about names and futures and what their family would look like, she was finally ready to meet the baby who'd brought them together. The drive to the hospital was different this time. No sirens, no panic, just the quiet anticipation of something long-awaited finally arriving. Janka's contractions were strong but manageable, and between them, she found herself studying Cristiano's profile as he drove. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, catching her watching him. "How different everything is from that first day at the diner." She shifted in her seat as another contraction built. "I thought I was just agreeing to carry a baby for 9 months, and instead you got stuck with me," he said with a small smile. "I wouldn't call it stuck." She reached for his hand as they pulled into the hospital parking lot. "I'd call it found." Dr. Santos was waiting for them in the delivery room, her calm presence immediately soothing Janka's nerves. The next several hours passed in a blur of contractions and coaching, of Cristiano holding her hand and whispering encouragements, of the overwhelming intensity of bringing life into the world. "I can see the head," Dr. Santos announced. "One more push, Janka." With Cristiano's hand in hers and her own determination fueling her, Janka pushed with everything she had left. And then, suddenly, the room filled with the sound she'd been waiting 8 months to hear, a baby's first cry, strong and indignant and absolutely perfect. "It's a girl," Dr. Santos said, her voice thick with emotion as she placed the baby on Janka's chest. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Janka looked down at the tiny face scrunched against her chest, dark hair, skin still red from the effort of being born, eyes squeezed shut against the bright world she'd just entered. She was perfect in a way that made everything else fade away. "She's so small," Cristiano whispered, his voice rough with tears. "She's perfect," Janka corrected, running a gentle finger over the baby's impossibly soft cheek. Dr. Santos worked quietly around them, handling the medical necessities while allowing them this first precious moment as a family, because that's what they were now, Janka realized. Not a business arrangement, not a temporary situation, but a family born from grief and hope, and the kind of love that surprised you when you least expected it. "What's her name?" Dr. Santos asked softly. Janka looked at Cristiano, seeing her own overwhelming emotion reflected in his grey eyes. They'd discussed names during the long weeks of bed rest, but somehow none of them had felt right until now. "Hope," Cristiano said suddenly, the name coming out like a prayer. "Her name is Hope." "Hope Ellis Moore," Janka added, including her own surname without thinking about it, making the baby theirs in a way that went beyond paperwork. "Hope Ellis Moore," Dr. Santos repeated, making a note in her chart. That's a strong name for a strong little girl. Later, after Hope had been cleaned and measured and declared perfectly healthy, after the nurses had given them privacy and visiting hours had ended, Janka and Cristiano sat together in the quiet hospital room, taking turns holding their daughter. "I need to tell you something," Janka said as she watched Cristiano cradle Hope with the careful reverence of someone who understood how precious life could be. He looked up, concern flickering across his face. "The contract," she continued, "I know what it says about after the birth, about me leaving." Cristiano went very still. "Janka, I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "I know we'll need to figure out the legal stuff, make it official somehow, but I'm not walking away from this. From her. From you." Relief flooded his expression, followed by something that looked like pure joy. "Are you sure?" Because once you decide to stay, I'm not letting you change your mind, I'm sure. She reached for his free hand, intertwining their fingers in the gesture that had become natural to them. I spent 8 years running from everything that mattered, because I was afraid of getting hurt. But you know what I realized? What? Getting hurt is worth it if it means getting to love someone. And I love you, Cristiano Moore. I love you and I love our daughter, and I want to build something real with you. He leaned over to kiss her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, careful not to wake the baby sleeping peacefully in his arms. I love you too, he whispered against her lips. Both of you, more than I ever thought I could love anything again. Outside the hospital window, the sun was setting over Napa Valley, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere in the distance, life was going on as usual. But here in this room everything had changed. A baby had been born, a family had been created, and two people who'd thought they were too broken to love again had discovered that sometimes the best things grow from the cracks. What happens now? Janka asked, looking down at Hope's sleeping face. Now we go home, Cristiano said simply. But we take our daughter home, and we figure out how to be a family. I like the sound of that, Janka said, and as Hope stirred in her father's arms, making the soft sounds that newborns make when they're dreaming, Janka thought about all the roads that had led her here, all the losses and fears and temporary homes that had somehow brought her to this moment, this man, this perfect little girl who would never doubt that she was wanted, loved, and home. Sometimes, she realized, the best destinations were the ones you never planned to reach, and sometimes the most beautiful love stories were the ones that began with a contract and ended with forever. 2 years later, the sound of bare feet running across hardwood floors woke Janka before the sun did. She opened her eyes to find Hope standing beside the bed, her dark curls still messy from sleep, clutching the worn stuffed elephant that had become her constant companion. At 2 years old, Hope had inherited her father's grey eyes and her mother's stubborn independence, along with a smile that could melt the hardest heart. "Mama, up!" Hope demanded, reaching chubby arms toward the bed. "It's still early, baby girl," Janka whispered. But she was already lifting Hope onto the mattress, settling her between herself and Cristiano, who was just beginning to stir. "Tiny too early," Cristiano mumbled into his pillow, but his arm automatically came around both of them, pulling his girls closer. This had become their morning ritual, Hope climbing into bed before dawn, the three of them stealing a few more minutes of warmth and togetherness before the day demanded their attention. The bed that had once felt too big for one lonely man now perfectly fit a family. Through the bedroom window, Janka could see the vineyard stretching toward the hills, the grapevines heavy with fruit ready for harvest. It was their third harvest together, and she still felt a thrill of ownership when she looked out at the land that had become home in ways she'd never imagined possible. "Dada, coffee," Hope announced, patting Cristiano's cheek with the imperious authority of a toddler who knew she was adored. "Coffee for the princess coming up," Cristiano said, sitting up and running a hand through his hair. He looked different now. The lines around his eyes came from laughter instead of grief, and the careful distance he'd once maintained had been replaced by the easy affection of a man who'd learned to trust happiness again. Downstairs, the kitchen filled with the familiar sounds of their morning routine, Hope sat in her high chair, chattering to her stuffed elephant while Cristiano made coffee and Janka prepared breakfast. The guest house had been converted into Cristiano's workshop years ago, its original purpose served and transformed into something new. "Dr. Santos called yesterday," Janka mentioned as she flipped pancakes. "So she wants to schedule Hope's checkup for next week. Everything okay?" Cristiano's voice carried the slight edge it always held when discussing anything medical, a father's protective instinct honed by experience. "Everything's perfect," Janka assured him. "She just wants to see how tall our little giant has gotten." Hope had indeed grown tall for her age, with sturdy legs that carried her everywhere at a run and a vocabulary that impressed everyone who met her. She was healthy, curious and completely unaware that she'd been the catalyst for a love story that had saved 2 broken hearts. "Speaking of Dr. Santos," Cristiano said, pouring coffee into 2 mugs and orange juice into Hope's sippy cup, "she mentioned something interesting at the farmer's market last weekend." "Oh," Janka raised an eyebrow, recognizing his tone. "She said she's been thinking about retiring, moving closer to her daughter in San Diego." He paused, studying Janka's face, but she also said she'd been hoping to find the right couple to take over her practice, people who understand what it means to fight for family. Janka nearly dropped the spatula. Cristiano, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I'm saying that you've learned more about high-risk pregnancies in the past 2 years than most people learn in medical school. I'm saying you have a gift for making people feel safe when they're scared, and I'm saying that if you wanted to go back to school, become a nurse practitioner or midwife, he shrugged, we could make it work. The idea hit her like lightning, unexpected, illuminating, and suddenly making everything clear. She thought about all the women she'd met in Dr. Santos's waiting room over the years, all the couples facing the same fears she and Cristiano had once navigated. She thought about her own hands learning to comfort, her own voice learning to soothe, her own heart learning that sometimes the most meaningful work came from sharing your scars. You'd really support that, the schooling, the time away, all of it. Yanka. Cristiano set down his coffee mug and moved to stand behind her, his arms circling her waist as she leaned back against his chest. I'd support you in anything that makes you happy. We both would. Both, she asked, laughing as Hope clapped her hands and shouted, Mama School, as if she'd been following the entire conversation. She's already planning to be your first patient, Cristiano said, pressing a kiss to the side of Yanka's neck. Aren't you, huh, Hope? Mama help babies, Hope declared with the certainty of someone who'd clearly overheard more adult conversations than they'd realized. Later that morning, after breakfast and after Hope had been dressed and entertained, Yanka found herself walking through the vineyard alone. It was something she did when she needed to think, to process, to remember how far she'd traveled from the woman who'd stepped off a Greyhound bus 3 years ago with everything she owned in 2 duffel bags, the woman who'd been running from attachment, from hope, from the possibility of building something permanent, the woman who'd thought love was a luxury she couldn't afford. Now, as she walked between rows of grapevines heavy with fruit, she could hear Hope's laughter floating from the main house, where Cristiano was probably building elaborate block towers for her to knock down. She could smell the bread she'd put in the oven before her walk, could see the laundry hanging on the line, domestic details that had once felt foreign and now felt like home. Her phone buzzed with a text from her former client, a small business owner whose books she still handled remotely. Hope you and the family are well. Still the best accountant I've ever worked with, even part-time. She smiled, typing back, We're wonderful. Talk soon. Part-time work, full-time mother, potential student. Her life had become beautifully complicated in ways she'd never anticipated. And at the center of it all was a love that had grown slowly, carefully, from the space between grief and hope. There you are. She turned to find Cristiano walking toward her, Hope on his shoulders, both of them grinning like they'd just shared a secret. We come find Mama, Hope announced, as if this had been a great adventure rather than a walk across their own backyard. You found me, Yanka said, reaching up to tickle Hope's dangling feet, earning a squeal of delight. We were thinking, Cristiano said, settling Hope on the ground where she immediately began collecting interesting rocks. Maybe it's time for a family trip. Oh, where did you have in mind? Montgomery. The word hit her like a gentle blow, carrying all the weight of a past she'd spent years running from. Montgomery, Alabama, home of magnolia trees and childhood memories, her parents' graves and her grandmother's house that probably still sat empty, waiting. I know it's been hard to think about going back, Cristiano continued quietly, but Hope should know where she comes from, both sides of her story. Yanka felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming gratitude of being known so completely. He understood that her reluctance to visit Alabama wasn't about forgetting her past, but about being strong enough to face it. You think I'm ready? She asked. I think you've been ready for a while. You just needed to realize it. Hope had wandered a few feet away, chattering to herself as she examined a particularly interesting grapevine. In the afternoon light, with her dark curls catching the sun and her small hands gentle with the leaves, she looked like a perfect blend of both her parents, Cristiano's thoughtfulness, Yanka's determination, and something entirely her own. Look, Mama, Hope called, holding up a cluster of grapes that had grown within her reach. Pretty, very pretty, baby girl, Yanka called back. Just like you. We could visit your parents' graves, Cristiano said softly. Let Hope meet her grandparents, even if it's just in story and memory. The idea of standing at her parents' graveside with her own family, of telling Hope about the grandparents who would have adored her, felt both healing and right. For years, she'd carried her grief alone. Now she could share it, let it become part of their family story, instead of a secret burden. I'd like that, she said. So I think it's time. That evening, after Hope had been bathed and read to and tucked into her crib with her elephant, Janka and Cristiano sat on their front porch, watching the sun set over the vineyard. The guest house stood empty now, but sometimes Janka still looked at it and remembered the woman who'd first walked through its door, scared, alone, convinced that attachment was dangerous. "Do you ever miss it?" Cristiano asked, following her gaze. "The freedom of not being tied down." Janka considered the question seriously. Did she miss the ability to pack everything she owned and disappear? Did she miss the simplicity of having no one to worry about but herself? "No," she said finally. "I don't miss being free. I was never free. I was just scared. There's a difference. And now? Now I'm brave enough to stay, brave enough to build something, brave enough to let people love me and to love them back, even though it's terrifying." Cristiano reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers in the gesture that had become their signature. "I'm proud of you, for everything you've become, everything you've built." "We've built," she corrected. "None of this would exist without you." "I think you're wrong about that," he said thoughtfully. "You would have found your way eventually. You're stronger than you know. Maybe. But I'm glad I didn't have to find it alone." Inside the house, Hope's baby monitor crackled softly with the sounds of a child settling into sleep, little sighs and the rustle of blankets and the occasional soft word spoken to her elephant. Soon there would be quiet, and Janka and Cristiano would go inside to their own bed, to their own dreams, to the life they'd built one careful day at a time. "Sire Cristiano," she said as they stood to go inside. "Yeah, I want to tell you something I've never told you before." He paused, concern flickering across his face. "What is it?" "The day I met you at the diner, I almost walked away. I sat in that booth for 10 minutes before you arrived, and I almost left. I was so scared of getting attached to anything, even a business arrangement." "What stopped you?" Janka smiled, remembering that moment of decision that had changed everything. "Hope. Not our hope, but the idea of hope. I realized I was tired of running from possibility." "I'm glad you stayed." "Me too." She stood on her tiptoes to kiss him, soft and sweet and full of all the tomorrows they were still planning together. "Me too." Years later, when Hope was old enough to ask about how her parents met, they would tell her about contracts and coincidences, about grapes and guest houses, about two people who were brave enough to let love grow in the space between what they expected and what they found. They would tell her about choosing each other, every day, in the small moments and the big ones. They would tell her that love wasn't about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone worth fighting for. And they would tell her that sometimes the best love stories are the ones that begin with business and end with family, that start with fear and end with home. But for now, as they walked hand in hand into the house where their daughter slept peacefully, where the kitchen still smelled like the bread they'd baked together, where the walls held photographs of a family that grew from hope itself, Janka simply felt grateful. Grateful for the bus ticket that had brought her here. Grateful for the contract that had become a promise. Grateful for the man who'd taught her that home wasn't a place. It was a choice you made every day to stay and fight and love, and build something beautiful from the ashes of what came before. Outside, the vineyard settled into evening quiet, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of life continuing. Owls calling, wind through leaves, the eternal rhythm of a world that kept turning, kept growing, kept offering second chances to those brave enough to take them. And in a house filled with love and laughter, and the sweet dreams of a little girl named Hope, a family slept peacefully, knowing that tomorrow would bring new adventures, new challenges, and new opportunities to choose each other all over again. It was, Janka thought as sleep claimed her, exactly the kind of love story she'd always hoped was possible, but had never dared to believe she deserved, until now. Karastitia, what did you learn from this story? Have you ever found love in the most unexpected place? Would you have made the same choice as Janka? Your participation in our channel is very important to us. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.